Reptichip sets the standard for reptile substrates. Made from the highest quality coconut available anywhere in the world, Reptichip allows enthusiasts and keepers to provide their reptiles with the necessary humidity and thermoregulation required for your animals to thrive. You can support the podcast by heading to reptichip.com/snakeboy or visit the link in the description below. This episode is brought to you in part by Exoterra. If you're as passionate about reptiles and amphibians as I am, you know that quality matters. I use Exoterra products on all my reptile and amphibian enclosures, which is why I'm excited to be partnering with them. From naturalistic decor to innovative lighting and enclosures of all sizes, Exoterra has everything you need for your cold-blooded companions. Exoterra, make your reptiles feel at home. This episode is brought to you in part by Unlimited Exotic Pets. Every day is Veranda Day for Nick Lillis, and it shows. At Unlimited Exotic Pets, Nick produces high-quality monitor lizards with a deep commitment to ethical care practices and top-tier nutrition. These aren't just pets. They're responsibly bred, ethically raised animals. Whether you're looking for a new companion, starting a breeding project, or anything in between, Nick has you covered. Unlimited Exotic Pets, keeping and breeding quality without limitations. Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Well, dude, so this is episode 101 of The Expert and the Idiot. I'm really excited to have you on, man, because...
Thanks, man, yeah.
I mean, dude, how many years consecutively have you been successfully breeding emeralds?
Let's see.
2025.
4 or 5 years in a row.
Wow.
First litter was in December 2021.
Wow.
So yeah, since I started trying to breed them, I've had success every year to at least one litter.
Wow. And now on average, what are you getting out of a litter?
Well, I haven't averaged it out, but I've had pretty good results overall. I've had 9 litters so far, and I've produced 73 babies.
Whoa.
In total. I mean, now a few of those were live babies. A few of them, you have like anything, that you have some that come out and for whatever reason don't make it after a day or two. But 73 in total. So I've had pretty good success rate overall with the pairings and the litter count. So it seems like I have like an average, I don't know, somewhere around 8, 10, something like this. I'm two out of it right now to do the actual averaging. But I've had a couple of, I had one total slug out litter. And then I think like 2 that were, pretty high slug count, maybe 3.
What do you think? So what do you attribute your success to? And then what do you also attribute slugging out to?
Okay. Well, so success, I'm still kind of in that process of figuring that all out. I think it's a combination of factors. I think them being, well hydrated is a part of it. And that, has to do with the keeping them properly humid, keeping them with fresh water. I know it's a little controversial. I think part of my success is from not spraying them. And I think that the way that I heat them also makes a difference for the most part. Although that, doesn't always work out well. I had some issues this season. After a move, I think I overheated them a bit, the gravid females. So I've got just 2 gravid. Well,
Do you know what the temperature was?
I don't know what they peaked at. I kind of stopped measuring temperature for the most part a couple of years ago because I was getting really neurotic about it for a while. When I started keeping them a little differently, like I do now, where I let the sunlight's what heats them.
Oh wow!
I was kind of neurotically checking temps all the time and panicking when it would get into the low 90s and freaking out, and even sometimes mid to high 90s. And really getting neurotic with it. And then I realized after a while, it's just like, okay, the way that I have them set up, they never get, the way I had them set up at the old house, they weren't really getting super hot for any extended period of time. So it wasn't really anything that I should be that concerned with. And in fact, it seemed to be working out really well, letting them get a little warm, for a short period and then go back down to a more reasonable ambient temperature. And so, what I think happened, what I assume went wrong this season, is we moved in August, and so what ended up happening, right when we moved into this new room, I tried to set everything up pretty much the same way that it was set up before, and I'm able to get it pretty close to the way that I was running the previous room, but of course it's a new room, so you're still trying to monitor that daily, see what's changing, what's fluctuating, what's stable. And it also happened to be that at that time, we were, I'm here in Central Florida, we were getting a bunch of rainstorms. And so the temperature outside was kind of all over the place, and that dictates what's going on in this room. And so I was checking temps and temp gunning the cages, temp gunning the females, and seeing pretty reasonable, temperatures pretty much where I wanted it to be. Making a little bit of adjustments with the AC to try to combat that. And then I made the mistake of being too lax with it and not consistently checking those temperatures for, the next few weeks. And once things warmed up, I think what I realized is I noticed the one female that was gravid, she was basically not really basking at all anymore. And so that's typical. They do ramp down towards the end of gestation anyways. So I didn't really think too much of it. I was like, well, she's due in a few weeks. And so I'm probably just missing it. I'm not catching her, basking. And the sun hits the windows at a different time of day here than it did at the old room. So they bask at a different time. And so everything's a little different. So I just kind of thought, I chalked it up to, well, she's probably just, not basking when I'm seeing it, and she's ramping down anyway, so that's it. But in hindsight, and after seeing the results of the litter, I'm like, she was just too warm. She wasn't basking at all because the ambient was too warm. Her cage was a little too close to the window, I think, so it was basically heating it up constantly. And I didn't get a totally terrible result. I mean, I got 4 live babies in the end out of it, but I had a higher slug count than I would have liked. And I think that was probably from overheating and the stress of the move. You know what I mean? It's multiple factors.
When you were moving, did you have a sense of fear that you were going to somehow inadvertently remove the, secret ingredient to your success?
Not really, because I think that I don't think there's one total little pinpoint secret to it. I was nervous for sure because I'm like, well, shit, things have been working really well in this room. And of course, moving to a different room, everything changes. And there's the stress of the move, on the snakes and on me. And, it's obviously a stressful time. And so I was definitely not thrilled about the possibility of things going south. And it remains to see. I've still got one gravid female who's due anytime. I mean, she could technically go as soon as a week from now, probably, but she'll more than likely go later. I'm guessing December, maybe even all the way into to January. I was nervous that things this season wouldn't go as well, but I felt pretty confident with the new room that I could get it to operate as close as possible to the previous room, and that it might take a season, maybe even 2 seasons to get to everything dialed in, but I felt pretty good about it overall. We didn't move super far away. So it's not a drastic shift in overall climate or anything. And it's mainly just figuring out how, the room itself is operating day to day.
Did you move to get more space, or was it for work, or like?
It was for personal reasons and for more space. It was kind of a combination of at the old place, it was really no way to expand as far as like adding more cages or increasing the size of cages or anything there. So that was becoming like, all right, well, how's that going to work if the collection's growing? And then the rent was going up higher and higher. And so it's just like, this is the whole thing's not working out. And, I don't like to put too much of my personal stuff out on the internet, but, we had, a family member that's not doing well, and we wanted to be closer to her. And so it was like, all right, this new place works out to kind of fix all of those problems at once. And so we were not really totally planning to make the move. But when the opportunity came up, we're like, all right, let's go ahead and do this. And, but it worked out to where I do have, more space now. And, everything can operate basically the same way as the old room, as far as just letting the sunlight control everything.
Are you renting that house, or did you buy it?
Yeah, we're renting. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you like in my mind, like I hate moving. I think it's like one of the most like stressful things. Like the last time we moved, that was the worst part of my life, because we were selling our house and we had to simultaneously buy another house. Like you like going to the place and closing on your house and being homeless for X amount of time and then buying another house. It's so stressful. And just the months leading up to that, weeks of it, literally having people come into your house, scrutinize your house, talk about why it sucks and what you need to fix is like such a horrible feeling, Like you need to hide that. You need to make storage and hide this stuff. And like just the thought of it, I never want to go through that again.
Yeah, it's terrible. And I mean, I imagine did you have the same size collection at that point, or no?
I had zero. So I had a couple snakes left, and I rehomed them before we moved. Actually, before we listed the house.
Well, that at least would have reduced the stress. I mean, imagine how much worse that is with,
yes,
trying to explain the snakes to people.
Dude, I thought about it the other day. I thought about moving and listing our house, and I'm like, we'll never sell this house. Like people are so dramatic about snakes, that it's like, oh my God, I don't even want to think about that. I'm here forever. I'm never moving. It's never.
I'm sure you get the same kind of thing where people, they find out that you have snakes, and it's like, I can't believe you've got these things in your house. Are they just crawling loose all over the place? And the
ideally, no.
Yeah, it's like, if I can help it, no, they're not just crawling around. I mean, but people I guess it's just, for some people, the idea is so foreign, what I mean? They just don't get it. So they just maybe assume that it's like, well, my dog is loose in the house, so why wouldn't a snake,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have one that she likes to, she'd prefer to not be in her cage, and I don't like her pushing. So if I'm in the room, I'll grant her that access, but she's also very predictable in her movements too. You know, she has like one favorite spot that she goes to, and that's about it. Yeah. But yeah, man, like, my heart goes out to you, because it's that moving is really rough. Yeah, and I kept from basically 20. It's weird. I kind of, how it like the past is always like really foggy, and I kept from like, I mean, I've had reptiles. Like I had a eastern collared lizard and a bearded dragon when I was a kid, and then when I moved out though in 2011 and got my first place, then it was like, oh my God, we're in a 3-bedroom house. Like I can breed rodents in one bedroom and have snakes in this other one. And I was never allowed to have snakes, so it was like, it was just a free for all, like this psychotic, like mad grab of like all these random animals. I wish I would have been more, focused, like that really saddens me that my first collection was just like one of each of everything. And, I could have done so much more with the space I had, looking back. I could have just been so much smarter and had a better collection, but I think I was still trying to find what I liked to, it was 2011 until 2019. And then I got out of it altogether for a couple years. And then once my kids, came out of being toddlers and they went back to school and we didn't have all the expenses of childcare and everything, then here I am, kind of all over again, and the hobby, in my opinion, has evolved so much, and the communication, the channels are open, and it's like fantastic. To be able to sit here and talk with you right now is incredible, even though we're in the same state, we're both in Florida. But yeah, it's really incredible. So when did you get started keeping, and what have your experiences been leading you to this point of having this how many, what did you say it was, 5 consecutive seasons of success with emeralds?
But it's 4. I'm too stupid.
4.
21, 2,
okay.
3, 4. 5.
I'm sorry.
No, because technically it'll be 5. It'll be 5. Yeah, because I'm starting to introduce and still have some actively breeding.
Right on.
But so I got into them. I have early memories of like seeing a snake. Probably was a black racer, but I maybe it was an indigo. I don't know for sure. It seemed like a huge black snake when I was like 4 or 5 years old in the backyard, and I was like, thought that was cool, and also trying to like be a badass hero, and I was like warning my family about it. I'm like, big giant snake, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was cool. And so I have some early memories like that, seeing them around. Obviously, growing up in Florida, you see things around. And but there was nobody in my family that kept or really, did anything. Never went out looking for snakes, nothing like that. And I think it was around, I was like probably 10, 11-ish when I first I ran into I met my friends Mike Fabrizio and Barry Swope, who both still keep now, and they're both active. Barry Swope's a pretty big ball python breeder, and Mike works with red-tailed boas still, and
nice.
Had a couple encounters with them. And Mike had a boa at the time, and then Barry had a corn snake, and we just all became friends. And then they all, were really into snakes at that point, and I got bit by the bug quickly, and I got my first snake. Technically, was Barry's first snake. He had a corn snake named Henry, and I can't remember if he gave it to me or sold it to me or what happened with it, but I had that for a little while, and then that went to another friend at some point, and then we started getting ball pythons and doing the whole same kind of thing, like you're talking, basically getting one of everything, anything we can get our hands on. And of course, at that time, this is not early, this is mid 90s.
Okay.
So,
how old were you?
I was 12 at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, about 12, 13 years old. I don't remember exactly what year it was that we first started keeping. They were a little ahead of me on keeping, so they were probably 9, 10 years old, something like this when they got them. Started keeping, started going to a couple of pet stores that had reptiles at that time, and then somehow found out about the National Reptile Breeders Expo, and it was still in Orlando at that point. So I went to the first one of those in 1994.
Wow.
Before it moved to Daytona. So of course that was like, they're still impressive shows now, but you can imagine what it would have been like back then when it was one of the only ones in the world, and everybody was coming from all over the world to be there. And so that was definitely a mind-blowing experience. And we started attending those shows, met Eugene Bissett from Ophiological Services at those shows. And of course, at that time, him and Trooper had the setups, the tables with all the green tree pythons.
Yeah.
Which was just like crazy to actually see them in person, instead of just seeing them in a magazine or a book. And that was wild as hell. And then he was, super generous, as he's always known to be, super nice guy. And he invited us to come to the facility. And so we ended up making 2 we made 2 or 3 visits there. I think it was 3 in total. But the first one was in I think summer 95. Wow. And that was just, he had at that point, he had a far more diverse collection. And so it seemed like he had what seems like he had multiples of basically every snake we'd ever heard of, venomous, non-venomous. He had everything. I know you're a fan of the Argentine boas. That was when he was starting some of those lines that I believe were the originators of the Max Pink stuff.
Wow.
And so these were just absolutely massive, massive gravid Argentine boas, dumerals, red tails, retics, berms, everything. It was when all the big snakes were still legal. So
talk to me about the Argentines. How did he have them set up? Do you remember?
He had most of his adult boas and pythons were all set up in those cages that he built himself. If you've ever seen any pictures of those, they're kind of famous cages now. And his name's slipping my mind at the moment. Who's the guy that's still kind of? I think he's the one that's spearheading the Max Pink stuff.
Oh, Bob Geyer.
Yes. He still has some of those cages. So I know he's posted stuff of those.
They're like pegboard, right? Like pegboard.
They have pegboard on the side. Yeah, they have like panels. It was a cool design. They were
they're big.
I want to say they were 8 by 4 by 2, or maybe even longer than that. He had a few different versions of them, but they all had a bunch of access panels, and then he could section off different parts of the enclosure. So if he needed to do maintenance, he could just didn't have to deal with a super angry big Burmese coming at you or retic or something. And, just it was an old school setup. So it was all newspaper for substrate for the most part. I think he had some stuff on cypress mulch at that point, but a lot of it was, newspaper and then, hides, or like he had, from what I remember, he had, some of those cages kind of sectioned off. So it was like, it was kind of functioned as like a dark hide area. And then light bulbs for heat, inside the cage. And, it was just crazy because, again, I had no prior real understanding that anybody could do anything like that.
Yeah.
It was like, you go to a pet store, there's a few snakes, even the reptile pet stores, specialty stores in the state didn't really have anything close to like what Eugene's place was like. So we went there and it was just like, holy shit, this is unbelievable. We all left just like buzzing, and it was like, we all want to be snake breeders now. We all want to, this is what we're doing. And we were just pumped, super pumped up for months, really years after that. And, he was real, cool with us. He showed us pretty much the whole collection. I think at that point, we've spent hours there. Just going through the two. I think at that point he had 2 main buildings, and then we even went in the house because he had so much stuff. It was like everywhere. There was overflow everywhere at that point. I remember I think he had some chondro cages set up in his kitchen, if I remember right, or like the living room or something. And so we saw those chondros. We saw some emeralds. He had a lot more chondros than emeralds at that point, but it was just mind blowing. Very, very cool to see. And he was already having success with all that stuff. He seemed to be successful with everything he was working with, really.
Nice. I just got a male from descended from his line, not the Max Pink, but just from the animals that he imported. Oh, and I'm super excited. I'm really happy to have
so they trace all the way back to those?
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think basically most of the animals do in the country, if I'm not mistaken, aside from I have a pair of Fortune line Argentines, and those are some that are not related to that line because they came, I believe they were smuggled from somewhere, Paraguay, Argentina, who knows, up to, I think it was LAX or California is where they got smuggled into. The people got caught. Those animals went to the Seattle Zoo, and then Edgar Fortune reproduced those. So I have a pair of those, and then I have my male that comes from Bissette's line, which I'm ecstatic to have, right? Like, it's so cool, just the history of that. I love natural history of the animals, but I also love the hobby history of these lines, especially with animals that are regulated like this. And then I've got a girl, my big girl is, I don't know what the hell she is, but she's an Argentine.
But it does seem like, because I don't remember, and I haven't followed all the full history of the Argentine boas. I had some back in the day. We got a few baby, juveniles, and I think we got a yearling from somebody, maybe Eugene, and anybody that we got them from at that point, they had come from Eugene. Yeah. It seems like just about all I can remember really did originate from his line, so that makes sense. But yeah, I can't remember when he stopped working with them, but do you know the full history on that? Did he kind of like sell them all off to somebody, or?
I'd love to get him on to talk specifically about that.
Yeah.
That is
just
a
to
goal
know,
of
the whole history of it. Yeah.
Dude, that is a goal of mine. That is absolutely a goal, is to get him on, and I could talk to him about Argentines. A friend of mine, Sean Perry, just sent me, I think, the original animals that were imported in the 80s, I want to say. I have the actual like image of it. I think it was like 47 animals were imported legally in the early 80s, I think it was.
That sounds
super cool. Super cool stuff.
If you haven't seen it before, I have on my Instagram page, I shared some photos from those early trips. So I have pictures of some of those gravid Argentine boas at his facility. I have them on the
I missed
it's on
that.
it's on one of my highlighted reel things. It's
okay.
It says like Ophiological Services or Eugene's, something I can't remember. But there's some pictures from there. I wish I had better pictures and more of them. I mean, I was a little crappy disposable camera is all I had at the time, but it just 90s. Even still having those is cool to have the memories of it and see some of that stuff on there. But so moving on from or just kind of continuing the history stuff, and if I'm dragging too long, you can absolutely
I just found this. So it was 1987 that the Occidentalis was brought in, and it was let me see here. Yeah, it gives like the number of the animals brought in. I think it was like, it's 48 animals, I believe, that were brought in.
Were those like I'm assuming mostly adults, or I guess probably a mix at that point.
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't think it says here.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. Wouldn't have even had the details.
Super, super cool though. But yeah, I got to look at that. I didn't know that you had those pictures. I love talking Argentines. I think that they're like one of the coolest boas.
They're dope. I might have to get a pair again at some point. Like, as much as I would love to have, there's of course plenty of cool stuff that I'd like to keep. I'm trying to stay pretty focused.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too spread thin with stuff, but maybe even just one Argentine, although the way my mind works, it'd be so hard to just have one. I'd be like, wow.
Yeah, you get a pair.
Why not have a pair? Why not? Well, and then that turns into a trio or what, how it goes. But
and then the trio turns into 2.2.
Yeah, and then you breed them, and then it's like, the idiotic mind I have is like, well, I've got to pursue every possible phenotype here. So I've got to keep all of them back. And then, that's... Yeah, it's a slippery slope. So that's why I haven't gotten into some of the things that I do still love a lot. But Argentines, I mean, they're one of the most beautiful snakes, I think in the hobby. And I've always was surprised that they didn't really catch on more.
Yeah.
Because there was a point where they were like, it was like nobody wanted them and they were so cheap. They were nothing. I mean, it was like $75, I think was the lowest I remember seeing them, maybe even 60 at one point. And now this is, this is a long time ago, so everything was cheaper, but still, it's like, it was crazy that they just, and Central American bows were the same thing. It's like nobody cared, because they weren't as bright and shiny, I guess, as the true red tails. Like it was like, there was a period of time there where it seemed like people didn't have the capacity to appreciate anything but super high contrast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're seeing that same kind of thing right now with emeralds too. People there's a tendency to only appreciate the biggest, boldest, most, kind of extreme patterns. But I think that's slowly changing, and I'm doing my best to change that. Just to show how cool the whole spectrum is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, being in the hobby the way you have, since the 90s and being able to have exposure to somebody as prominent as Eugene Bissett, and like seeing the market go up and down with something like Argentines, like they were so cheap. Right. And then I remember, what was it, like 2022 or 2023, I was looking at them and they were like $1,800. I think they were listed for on Morphmark, and I'm like, whoa. And then, what's really crazy, is that I'm like obsessed with these Argentines. And, I was talking to my uncle who he exposed me to snakes in captivity first. He had berms and it turns out Argentines. I told him, I'm like, yeah, I got these Argentines. And he's like, dude, that was like my favorite snake that I had. And I'm like, what? So like, like all of a sudden I'm like, I didn't even realize that I was exposed to an Argentine boa when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And it wasn't even clicking that, you know, and here I am like obsessed with them. It's so weird. And I also, you know, I saw an indigo, and I have like an obsession with indigos too. Like I remember seeing this giant black snake when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And it's crazy how it kind of, those experiences sort of imprint on you, you know?
Yeah. And you can forget stuff too. You know, you go through life and, you know, you forget things that you've seen. I've definitely, especially having worked at an importer for a while, like at a wholesaler, like I've forgotten way more stuff than I can remember, probably, as far as the different reptiles I've seen, dealt with, worked with at one point, you know, had passed through my hands at a facility or seen at somebody's house or whatever. And like, you can just, but that stuff, it's like, it's still there in your subconscious. You recognize it's like, oh yeah, shit. Like you said, you who knows if that had, you know, how much of a role that played in your kind of current obsession with them now, even though you didn't make that connection at first, you know?
Yeah. It's like, it's crazy. Cause I'm sitting there. I'm like, why am I so drawn to like these giant black Texas indigos, you know, like what, and it has to be from that exposure when I was a kid, you know, like I think that's just kind of how my brain works. Like I had these, you know, I remember being terrified of my uncle's, I think he had an albino berm, and he was telling us how it like latched onto his friend's shoulder and just wrapped around his bicep, you know, and like it was around his neck or something. And I remember just that, hearing that, it was like terrifying to me, but it made me that much more curious. And like, how come it's being so calm right now, you know?
Yeah, trying to understand. Yeah, how does it go from, you know, those two extremes?
Yeah. So take me back to Eugene's place and that experience and kind of where you went from there.
So we went, like I said, the first trip was 95. Cause I went to the first expo, National Reptiles Breeders Expo was 94. And then we went together as a group of my friends in 95. Cause I can't remember the details. Like they got in trouble right before the expo in 94. So it ended up, I went alone, like with my mom and sister. We were all supposed to go together. And, so then it was the next year we went and then we ended up talking with Eugene at that show and he invited us out. So we went, it was like a few weeks after the expo that we went and visited the facility. And, like I said, that was mind blowing. We saw all the, you know, everything you could possibly imagine at that point, and hugely inspiring. And that was also like a cool experience because he instilled some ideas that is still kind of, you know, have imprinted to this day. Record keeping is one of them. You know, he sent us home with a stack of his custom little record keeping cards that he had.
Really?
And so that started that. Not all of us, actually, I'm probably the only one that kept up with doing that. Mike, I don't think does, and swept that. But to me, I'm like, yes, sir. I'm going to start, you know, learning how to do this and following this. And so I started doing the record keeping right off the bat, using those and making copies of his note cards.
What does that look like? What are you recording and like what are you saving?
So, well, nowadays I just basically, you know, it's obviously sometimes I make mistakes, forget to write stuff in there, but I just use spreadsheets now. But it's still a spreadsheet basically based on the original cards from Eugene. So I'll record probably more than I need to. Like I'll just record, you know, feedings, defecations, sheds, any interesting observation that I've seen that seems like it is worth remembering and going back and looking at it. And that's the majority. And then obviously with breeding, like if I observe locks or, you know, any kind of particular reproductive behavior, I'll try to write that down. It's getting a little obnoxious the way I'm doing it right now because I have them all in spreadsheets and it's become unwieldy. I need to figure out a better system. But I've looked at the other software solutions that are out there right now and I don't really love them. Like they don't really look like they're going to be what I want them to be. So for the moment, I'm just kind of continuing on with what I'm doing. And that just stems really from seeing what Eugene was doing. You know, he was at that point, I'm sure he's refined what he does now. And I remember hearing him and Stephen Tillis make reference to the way that they record data is a much smarter approach now. But I'm still kind of basing it off of those old cards and just recording those events. And then it comes in handy looking back when you need to remember when something, occurred, and picking up on patterns of things. So yeah, it's just a habit I've kind of always stuck with. I know some people don't bother with that. My friend Swope, he just keeps everything in his head. To me, that's a little crazy.
That is crazy.
But he doesn't, he's on top of it. You know what I mean? He knows, and then he'll reference back like pictures that he snaps of something, and then he's like, oh, here's when that female ovulated or whatever. And so everybody just kind of does their own thing. But for me, I like having that stuff on the spreadsheets, and works pretty well.
Yeah, I can't remember when I feed anything. I have like dry erase little cards, and I just put like feedings and sheds on there. And then once I get to the bottom, I take a picture of it and put it in that animal's file, and then erase it and start over. And it's definitely been helpful, because there's times where I'm like, oh shit, I haven't fed you in 3 weeks. It feels like it was a week, Yep. Yeah, exactly. There's times where, and you'll pick up on stuff too, just recording certain sheds and in events, you'll see, year over year patterns too, where it's like, oh, they shed pretty damn close. Sometimes it's like, oh, this male shed on the exact same date for the last 3 years, whatever, stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting. And not that it's always super insightful, but it's at least interesting. And I'm sure there's probably something to be learned there, even if I'm not smart enough to pick up on what that is. Just like, oh, I can see certain patterns. I don't know if I know what it means yet, but yeah,
maybe one day I will.
So where did you go from there? Like, that has to have been such a formative experience.
Oh yeah, it was huge.
That Eugene was like that, and it makes me wonder, because, you mentioned Tillis, and I recently went out to visit him and see his collection with my kids and my wife. And I'm like, man, like this is going to have an impact on my kids and who they end up being later in life.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Those kind of, all those events like that, or especially when somebody who's like the thing that was really cool about Eugene and Cindy, his wife, rest in peace to her. She, she was very involved with everything as well. And of course, although, Eugene did most of the talking and everything, she was like, I always feel like she didn't get enough credit necessarily, publicly anyways. I'm sure Eugene praised her, but like, I don't think a lot of people realize how much work she was doing to during some of the chondro production and getting those babies started and everything. But just having somebody that was such an expert in what they were doing take that time to really answer your questions, and just to show you a bunch of cool stuff is really, that it's definitely one of those things where I would imagine even if your kids don't get really into reptiles, it's still going to shape them. That experience.
I think it's the passion, right? The passion has to be infectious. Like the coolest thing about going to see Tillis was how excited he was to show us the animals.
Yep.
And it's like, and I know I've said this before, like you don't get that if you go to like a reptile house at a zoo. And it's just an employee there, and they're just like, this is this and this is that, right? He takes so much pride in his animals, that he even told us, he was like, I'm excited to show you these. He's like, this is fun for me, and it's like, that's so cool.
Oh yeah. That's always part of the fun of, when somebody, especially if somebody who either doesn't have any prior really exposure to it, or it's been, it's kind of a budding thing. Like they maybe have some interest. Like obviously your kids have been exposed to the reptiles at this point, but it's a different side of them. And I'm sure they got to see all sorts of stuff they've never seen before. And Tillis is obviously a brilliant dude. So he's, I'm sure, bestowed lots of knowledge and just the passion that he has for his work to them. And I think anything, like that is going to make a lasting impression for sure. And the passion, we were like beyond buzzing for weeks. And after going to Eugene's, particularly that first time, because it was like, and it, again, for the perspective, that would be cool to do in today's era, but it was definitely different considering the fact that there was no podcast, there was no video footage of anything other than just I mean, shit, I remember we would like try to, record on the VCR any little snippet of footage from National Geographic or whatever you could like, whenever you knew like, oh, some snake show is going to be on. And if you're lucky, or some animal show is going to be on at 9 and you might catch 30 seconds of a cool looking snake or something. That was, that was it back then. So compared to now, it's different, but still, that hands-on experience, that in-person experience with somebody who's really passionate about what they're doing, I think is very infectious, and certainly was for us. Yeah,
absolutely. So where did you go from there?
So let's see. So that was, mid 90s. We just started growing our collections literally with the intent of, it was like, we all want to be Eugene. So that we're all going to be snake breeders. So we all had the different stuff we were passionate about, started, kind of going in those directions. And then it was like, I think it was 98. It must have been 97 or 98. Swope somehow found this little, wholesaler in Central Florida. We went to that shop, and Swope then at some point, a few months later, started working there. And then a few months later after that, he asked if I wanted to work there. So I started working there. I think it was 17 or something at the time. And, it was just a small little kind of, being honest, a pretty shitty wholesaler. And, as they tended to be, and in some cases still are. And so I ended up working there for, I think, 2 years or 3 years, trying to basically do my best to improve the conditions for everything and to, come up with such novel ideas as giving animals water to drink and, introducing these concepts that, apparently revolutionary to this guy at the time. But it was, it was like a mixed bag. It was obviously, you see a lot of the worst side of the industry at that age, and at that time. But also we got to see tons of cool stuff, like, all sorts of cool animals and meet a lot of cool people and everything through there. So it was an interesting experience for sure, but it ultimately ended up burning me out. Like I had just seen too much of the kind of negative side of the industry, and, it turned me off from keeping altogether for a while. So I actually got out of keeping, I think it was probably 2002 or 2003. Let me think here. Had to have been, somewhere at 2002, 2003 is when I had, finally got rid of the, what I had left of my collection. And I just kind of was, burnt out on it and wasn't really cool on keeping animals at that point. And, but I was like, I still obviously got to kind of live vicariously through my friends that were still working with them and everything. So I actually didn't keep for what, 10 years, 15 years almost. Didn't keep anything. And then, so there was this whole kind of gap of not keeping. And then it was 2017, Mike's, brother passed away, and he had a green tree python at the time. It was like about 2 years old or something. And it was actually produced by our other friend, Jason Kittinger, who's another guy that we knew from back in the early days. And, to kind of reverse a little bit there, one thing I forgot to mention about the history, and again, if I'm rambling, just cut me off. We were lucky in Central Florida. We had access to the Central Florida Herp Society meetings. So we started going to those, some around the same time, seemed like 94, 95, right in that era. And so Wayne Hill was the president at that time, and, who runs the National Reptile Breeders Expo. And, we had another boa guy that was big back in the day that you don't hear much about anymore, but people, that are in the know about him, is Dennis Sargent, if you've ever heard that name.
No.
Dennis Sargent, he had at the time a massive collection of locality boas. He had pretty much everything that I was aware of, and then some.
Wow.
And he was, from what we can remember, he was pretty private. I think we tried to like go see this, like we're probably like inviting ourselves, like, oh, can we come over? And I'm sure he's just like, yeah, I'm not having these annoying little brats coming over to the collection. He wasn't as open as Eugene was about that. But he had tons of cool stuff, and he would bring some things to the meetings. And then he also had this, I remember he had, which a few of these guys did, they'd have their photo book. That was like the thing at the time, if you weren't bringing animals to these meetings, which a lot of people didn't bring much, or maybe they'd bring one or two things, you'd at least you'd have these photo albums. And so we'd go there and just drool, going through these photo albums, looking at, everything. He had all the different locality bows that I could, remember to this point. I'm sure he had some stuff that's probably not even around anymore. Similar to like then, you know what I mean? Just tons and tons of rare stuff. And, so we had those experiences, at those herp meetings. And, then again, fast forwarding back to, after the experience of not keeping for a while, then Mike's brother passed away, and he asked me if I wanted to take care of his green, if I wanted to take on his green tree python, because he knew, I always loved them back in the day. And I'd had briefly for one fucking day, I had, my technical first chondro I got was when I was working at the wholesaler, and there was a super crazy looking high yellow one that came in that I still, to this day, it reminds me of what you see with the Kofio. I don't know if that's what it actually was or not, but it was, a pretty large animal to still be solid yellow like that. And, I, like an idiot, ended up killing it with overspraying it, with, mite spray.
Oh no.
Yep. Dumbest. It was so stupid. I got it home. I had checked it before, thought it didn't have any mites, but then I got it home, saw it had a couple of mites on it. And that morning when I left for work, just in a rush, sprayed whatever the mite spray we were using at the time. I don't know what it was. It was something in a hand sprayer. And I remember, smelled pretty strong. Sprayed way too much of that in the enclosure. Not nearly enough ventilation for that kind of thing. Came home to a dead chondro. So that was a terrible experience there. But anyways, jumping all back and forth here a little bit. But to get back to it, he asked me if I would keep that snake, and of course I couldn't say no. I briefly thought about it. I'm like, well, I don't know if I really want to, get back into keeping or whatever. Thought about saying no, but then of course I couldn't. So I'm like, yeah, I'll take him, of course. And got that snake, and it was just like instant, 0 to 100. Like, I mean, just immediately bit by the bug again. It was like reigniting the flame of keeping, and it was pretty cool. It was like, obviously us losing our friend, it was a tough time. It sucked. But the one positive thing that came out of that is that it did kind of completely respark my passion for keeping. And so it, just skyrocketed from there again. So I got that chondro, and then immediately, literally within minutes, I'm like, well, it wouldn't be that bad to have a pair of them, and it's ramping up. I tried to keep it, under control, but within a few months or so, I think I had gotten another one. And then within a year or so, I had another one or two chondros. And then, the Emerald Project, I decided to start that at the beginning of 2019.
Oh, wow. Now, how long were you at the, wholesaler? How long were you working there?
It was about it's a little fuzzy. I think it was maybe in total 3 years of working there, because I worked there, I think 2 years, and then I left and then came back for like 6 months, I think, and left again.
Okay. And was that like how old were you? Were you like 14, 15?
No, I was 17 when I started.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was 17 there. And, but yeah, it was overall a good experience, but you can imagine what kind of stuff you see at a place like, a wholesaler back in the 90s.
Oh yeah. I remember
90s.
going to a wholesaler. I can't remember when it was, but man, I remember going in, and just the smell and the amount of animals, it was the biggest turnoff. Like I remember going there excited, and then going into it and being like, oh man, like my skin is crawling,
It was, that's where what was such a mixed experience there. And that it was like, there was cool stuff about it, but there was also a lot of just awful shit, and it's, like I said, it ultimately, it burnt me out on keeping altogether. I didn't want to keep any snakes. I didn't want to keep anything.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I can't, you just see too much of the negative side of things. And that experience was ultimately good going through that. but it's not something I would advise many people to willingly put themselves through.
Yeah.
And we're in a different era now too. Like, things are improved compared to what it was back in the day. You still have some of the same horse shit. You have some of the same, bad conditions. You have some of the same kind of scumbags that run some of the flippers and these kind of things. But overall, it's definitely improved. For anybody who thinks it's bad now, it's just like, yeah, you didn't know how it was back in the day.
Yeah.
So, so the passion was reignited for keeping, in 2017, and it just took back off from there. And then, like I said, I started the Emerald Project in 2019, and just went into it with the idea that, like, well, I want to, everybody, I obviously always liked, thought emeralds were cool, but back in the day, it was like, they're a nightmare. Nobody seemed to be able to keep them with any success. And when I was looking into the forums, checking stuff on Facebook and everything, it seemed to be a lot of the same kind of talk. But I thought, like, well, I have the right. I just felt like I had the right combination of neuroses and experience and skill to where it's like, well, I could take this challenge on. Like, I've just crazy enough to try it, I guess. And so, but I was just going into it with the idea of like, well, it'll be cool to try to get, succeed breeding them once.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of exploded. Then the emeralds quickly became my favorites over the chondros, which I still love my chondros, but definitely the emeralds are, that was like, that's my, my snake.
What is it about the emeralds that you love?
Aside from the obvious look, I think the way that they move is just something. I've kept a lot of boas and pythons. I guess I've been fairly balanced in that way, but I think I always lean a little more towards boas. Just the way that they tend to move and behave. And for me, my experience with working with the emeralds is that they don't seem to be that different in terms of working with most boas. I've gotten pretty comfortable with handling them and interacting with them. And I regard them kind of the same way. So it's the movement, it's the build of them, it's the look of them. And they just, to me, are a little more, they kind of act a little more curious. So that's, they just, I don't know, they're just badass. I don't have a real great singular reason, but they just, for whatever reason, they just kind of mesmerize me.
Yeah, I see them, and if it wasn't for their price tag, I'd probably already have one. And it like terrifies me because I think I would have a lot more than one, like they're so cool. They're so beautiful.
Let me just turn my volume up a little bit here in my headphones. Yeah, they are. And there's obviously the basins are a whole different ball game in terms of pricing. You know what I mean? That's I have a single basin at this point. My whole collection's pretty much northerns, as far as the emeralds go. But it exploded out of control. I did not expect to have anywhere near. I mean, my when I produced that first litter, I remember talking with Ed, and Ed's just like, you might want to just keep all, because I think I had 4 babies that lived out of that one. I had 5 originally, and one didn't make it. And it was like, I got to hold on to this because you don't know if you're going to produce any more, and you don't know what kind of numbers you're going to get. And then I just have been lucky and combination of lucky, and I do think I've been pretty consistent in how I've approached them. And but I definitely did not anticipate to have this many of them this fast. And so it's a little absurd. And I'm starting the painstaking process of like picking out, like, okay, I've got to really figure out what is my absolute favorites, because there's no way that I can actually keep all of these and raise them to adulthood. My mind keeps trying to trick itself into thinking that's going to somehow work out. But it's like, come on, basic math and space here. This is not even remotely tenable.
So everything you have is a holdback?
Most of it. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of become the mentality, is just like you find something you like about all the babies and you end up wanting to keep everything. I've sold some. I've definitely let some go, and I'll be selling some more. But, my approach to it has been to try to hold on to them and really learn about them and watch how they change and, not be in such a rush to just sell everything and get the quick buck, which unfortunately seems to be a lot of the trend with emeralds right now. With not everybody, but there's definitely this kind of gold rush mentality of like, try to scoop up as many wild caught adults as possible, breed them as fast as possible, and try to get a quick dollar. But that wasn't my mindset going into it, and still isn't.
So what is your mindset going into it? And like what's the ratio? Are all of your
at this point? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Mental illness at this point, would you call it? Probably is the closest.
We're all there. I just had Adam Wickens on. He said we're broken toys.
That's pretty much, yeah, probably.
Reptile keepers. So what did did you acquire wild caught animals or did you try to get, so all of your breeding stock is wild caught?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I've just been holding back, the products of that and and that's the other thing about it too. So like, I don't have really that many, well, to me, it's not that many, adults at this point. Most of the, animals I have are my holdbacks. Yeah. So I didn't take the approach, and I think that's part of the reason why I've done well with them too, is that I didn't do that like quick buck thing, where it's just like buy as many as you can and throw as many together as fast as possible and just see what comes out of that. So I was pretty slow and deliberate. I was really picky about which ones I chose, and quarantined them for as long as I could, and did multiple stages of quarantine. So it's been a slow, pretty painstakingly slow process, building that initial group of adults. But I think that worked out, well in the long run.
Walk me through that process of quarantine and bringing in these wild caught adults that, I mean, like how far from the wild are they when you're getting them?
I was always trying to get them as fresh as possible. So, trying to get them, as soon as they arrive from a shipment, if you can, or, if they've been at a reseller's facility, hopefully not very long, because I am of the belief that, the problems, a lot of the problems with them stems from, the period of time that they're held here. I know there's like a tendency to blame everything on, the exporters, but it's a mixed bag. I think it's a combination of the two. And I've having had the prior experience working at a wholesaler and seeing how things can be, it's just like, yeah, I mean, very few people are really doing that process correctly or clean or anything. So, my approach to it was basically like get, one or two at a time and try to, I initially was quarantining them in a separate room. The first couple ones were in like a separate room on the opposite side of the house. But then I had an incident where there was like a few, that I wanted to buy, but I didn't have anywhere to quarantine them. And so I decided, I'm just like, well, I'm not getting them, and that was kind of a bummer. Cause I'm like, shit, I really wanted to get, it was like a trio of anaconda phase emeralds. Actually, they ended up going to Warren. And, but so I decided to pass on them because I didn't have any place to quarantine them. And then that made me think, I'm just like, well, I need a solution to that because this is going to take forever. It's like, to quarantine them for a year or two at a time, because each time you introduce a new animal, you're technically resetting quarantine. Yeah. So that's when I started quarantining them outside.
Oh, what?
So yeah, I started taking that approach of I had a little separate laundry room building, and that's when I basically started doing a 2-stage quarantine system. So start them outside in that room, and then if they get through that first like 6 to 9 months out there, then they come in, they're in a separate room for another 6 to 9 months or so, and then if everything's been picture perfect basically, then they'll come into the main collection.
Walk me through that. What does your quarantine look like, and what are you looking for to go wrong? And like, what tests are you running, if any? Are you running? Are you putting them on any dewormers or anything to treat for parasites?
No, I did that the first few times I was kind of just preemptively treating them, with the typical stuff, Panicure, Flagyl. but I chose, after listening to Warren talk about it, I stopped doing that, because I think that his approach is correct. His mentality about that. It's like, just blasting them kind of blindly with meds for no real good reason is probably going to do some damage to their digestive system and throw them off in general. And, so I took the approach of like, well, let's watch what they do, see what they, how they're actually behaving, how are they feeding, how are they digesting. And, again, being really, really picky with the animals, trying to pick ones that only looked, like they were in good shape to begin with. I passed on plenty of snakes that were outwardly beautiful as far as pattern and color, but they had that kind of undescribable look to them. It's like something's off, something's not right with that one. You know what I mean? Doesn't look like it's healthy. And so yeah, just basically, trying to pick out the best ones that I could to begin with. And then one of the approaches I took that was different than some people do is that I just try to feed them right away. I don't really see any sense in the, waiting months or even weeks to feed them, and then doing the like trickle feed thing where it's like, go give them a tiny meal and then slowly ramp it up. To me, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I just feed them like I basically would try to feed them as if they'd already been here.
Really?
I feed them no different. Just feed them a full size meal right away. Most of the time, I was able to get the majority of them to start, take a frozen thawed meal the first day or the second day.
Wow.
And then, and then just giving them, basically giving them food, monitoring their behavior, monitoring obviously the defecation, seeing how they handle digestion, seeing if there's any signs of any illness there. And then hydrating them, making sure that they have clean, fresh water. I stopped spraying the Chondros and the Emeralds back in like 2020 or 2021. And then even the wild caught ones, just basically, I don't think that the spraying them is the key or the secret like a lot of people do. I think the humidity is what it is. I think the humidity and the fresh water. So my focus on quarantining them, right off the bat is basically just giving them clean water either every day or every other day, fresh, clean water in the bowl, leaving them be, and then just keeping them really humid, and, keep them on, simple, always started them off simple, just pretty bare bones setup for the quarantine, just a, couple clean perches, usually like a garden stake or some kind of a, plastic perch, and then, paper towel or a puppy pad to be able to monitor for mites and see what the defecation looks like and everything. And then, just for the most part, leaving them be. Although I do kind of, part of my philosophy with approaching them, I guess, is that I try to have just little small interactions with them every day, or close to every other day. And that doesn't necessarily need to be much. It's just me going in there, changing water. I'll kind of look at them, maybe not poke and prod at them like to irritate them, but just kind of touch them a little bit, get them to respond a bit, and then just keep those little minimal interactions, brief, but, almost trying to kind of teach the animal that like, look, I'm not a threat. I'm not something that you need to be super stressed out about. Some of them seem to get that right away. They understand it. They seem to pick up on that and they get pretty relaxed pretty quickly. The occasional high-strung individual definitely doesn't care about that I'm trying to come at them with a calm approach. And, I've got one female anaconda phase I'm thinking about in particular right now. That's just one of those animals. It's like a natural born, just, that snake is not going to chill out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what I do. She's probably never going to be a mellow animal. But I find the overwhelming majority of them were, I generally handle them straight out of the bag and don't really have to do much to get them to chill out.
So have you ever dealt with any regurgitation issues like in the beginning, like after the first or second meal, and then you're like, shit, maybe I should have waited a little bit longer? No,
I've been very lucky with that. So I had one adult that didn't pass quarantine that regurged once. And I chose to have, euthanized. And then I had a baby that I don't know if it actually did regurge or not. I think it did. but I had tried assist feeding. It was a juvenile that I'm trying to remember. Or no, that was probably a yearling. Actually, it wasn't a baby. I had tried to assist feed it because it hadn't fed for me, and I wanted to get something, try to get it started on something. And I had given it a frozen thawed rat pink head, and just kind of popped that in the mouth. And then when I checked it the next day, that had been either spit out or maybe it started to digest it and regurgitate. And then that snake actually crashed really fast within, I think, a day or two later, something like that. So something was up with that one, but I never got to find out what was up.
The animal that didn't pass quarantine and had to be euthanized, what was wrong with it? Was it filled with parasites? Did it have a virus?
I don't know exactly what was wrong with it. I didn't have a necropsy on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them I've had necropsies, some of them I didn't. But it looked like the typical thing that you've seen. That's been a thing with boas and emeralds forever, is basically the either chronic regurg syndrome or like an occasional regurg. And so you'll see that when you've had that, they'll eat a meal and then it's anywhere from a few days. Typically it's like if they have that chronic regurg thing, from what I remember back in the day, what we always used to see, and at that point we didn't know what it was. It was generally referred to as, like, I remember we seemed to call it proto bloat, like protozoa bloat, but they would typically eat a meal and then the stomach would bloat way up, like very abnormal swelling, and it was always really gassy to the touch. And then it was like 3, 4, 5 days later they would regurgitate that meal. And it was common with the import red tails, and it was common with the import emeralds. The weird thing is it never seemed to be that common with Amazon tree boas.
Huh.
And I've never understood why that is, because I don't remember. I'm trying to think back in the day when we used to get those in. Maybe a few of them, but it was like very, very few of them ever regurgitated. And that seems to be the experience people have today. You hear about it occasionally, but they're just, for whatever reason, just don't seem to be experiencing that. But the boas, it was bad. Seemed like it was just as bad. Emeralds get the kind of the bad rap for that, but back in the day, anyways, the wild-caught boas seemed to be just as bad.
Really? I had dealt with regurg with my fortune line Argentines, and I was told it was because I fed them too soon. I don't know what the issue was. They each regurgitated once, and I was very alarmed. I was like, I love my animals. I don't want anything to happen to them. And luckily, the breeder it just was like, you're doing something wrong. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? You fed them too soon. It was kind of this back and forth where it was kind of, I guess you could say, maybe contentious. And, luckily I got Dr. Booth, and, I was able to talk to him, and I think, he kind of sent me some information and talked to Keith, and, that I think I ended up increasing some temperatures and maybe moving my quarantine rack to an interior wall instead of being up against an exterior wall, which might have been cold at that time of year. I think it was in like February, Florida, February. It gets pretty cool at night. And thank God they've been fine ever since, so I don't know what caused that. It was a bummer. I just remember being terrified.
Oh yeah. Back in the day, it was like, that was always the worst thing when you had a snake. But I think the thing is that there's different types of that scenario. There's true one-off regurg events, like it sounds like you had. And that, you hear about that with boas, it being pretty common. It's like, especially with the babies, where they might regurg once and then they don't do it again, unless somebody does something stupid and just starts like, not doing it on purpose, but that's probably a new keeper thing where somebody feeds it regurges, and then a day or two later they give it another meal, and they kind of exacerbate the whole thing by doing that. But it seems to be a difference there between the ones that just regurg once or twice when they're juveniles, or even a one-off event, as an adult, versus the stuff that was, the true chronic regurg syndrome that was afflicting both the boas and the emeralds back in the day, where, they're rapidly losing weight. It's like, there's no question on whether this is an infection, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so, that's like when because people come to me obviously for asking questions on emeralds all the time. And that's one of the most common things I get is, fed it and it regurged and, what do I think the situation is? And the majority of the times, unfortunately, ends up being a chronic regurg thing where they're dealing with a snake that's, they always think, well, I fed it a little too big of a meal, or I fed it, something was a little off. And I'm like, well, I hope that's the case, but you need to approach it from the perspective of that's not going to be the case. So you need to keep this animal isolated. You need to, do whatever you can to try to avoid potentially spreading anything to your collection. And occasionally it is just a one-off event thing. I weird one that is a friend of mine contacted me about that. I won't, say, because I don't know if he wants to go public with it or not, but it ended up being that the snake, had a one-off a regurg event, and it was just one of these like freak accident things where it had ended up eating a huge paper towel.
Oh.
And it's like the snake's been perfectly fine ever since then. But of course, paranoia when that first kicks in. So there's stuff like that I think happens, and heat spikes, like or real bad temperature drops. But I've been lucky in that so far I haven't had any baby emeralds that, that any of the captive ones that I've not had a single regurg. Even the wild ones when they were outdoors, and had meals in them and the temperature would drop, like, it's getting around this time of the year where you can have that kind of, sporadic temperatures where it's like, one day it's getting up to 86 and it's only 65 or 70 at night. And then
or
the next
45
day
like it was the other night.
Yeah, exactly. So there's been a few times I wouldn't intentionally feed them. If I know that it's going to be really cold, I'm not going to be feeding them. Generally during the winter, I'm always fasting them anyways. But there was around this time of the year in particular, there was a few times where I had fed them, normal size meal to an adult wild caught, and it dropped down into the 50s or even one time in the 40s, and I had no problem with it.
Wow.
But I also think, and I don't fully understand it, I think there's a difference between the natural, when they're in kind of quote unquote natural ambient temperature versus indoors with air conditioning and external heaters. I think that I noticed that with heat in particular. When I was keeping them outdoors in that room. Now they weren't in outdoor like screen cages. They were in tubs, like super highly ventilated tubs, but it was in a room, that was just naturally heated by the sun. And that initial quarantine process is what informed me to start keeping them the way that I keep them now. And that I was doing that out of necessity initially. And then seeing them just like, man, they're fucking thriving. Like they're thriving in these really nice, warm ambient temperatures, where it's shaded and they have just really high humidity. Like they're rocking and rolling right off the bat like this. And, so I noticed that it's like, when they're in a nice warm ambient temperature that's just natural warm air, they can sit tight comfortably. They look perfectly comfortable even if I'm temp gunning them and they're, reading 97, 98 degrees. But if they're indoors and they're dried out, in a dry room with the AC, and they're getting, in the mid to high 90s from like a heat panel, they're hanging loose. They don't look comfortable. It feels different. I don't know all the specifics of, why they respond the way that they are there. But I imagine just kind of from a common sense standpoint, I mean, I could sit out in, 95 ambient shade. And I'm not going to love it as a human. I'm not going to love it, but like I can handle that, and I'll take that over like put me under a fucking 7-Eleven hot dog heat lamp in a dry room. Get me to the same temperature. If I have to make a choice, I'm going to go in the ambient sun, the ambient warmth outside. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's definitely some behavior differences there.
It's crazy I'm keeping diamond pythons outside.
Mm-hmm.
And the other night, the temperature dropped and I got up and I'm like, man, it's cold. Like I can feel it's cold in the house. And I went outside and I temp gunned them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the females was up in the branches, and I temp gunned her. It was fluctuating between like 45 and 48 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like,
you're probably panicking a little bit, right?
Yeah. I'm like, what have I done? They ate like 6 days ago, like this isn't good. Like I wanted them to, maybe have a month of not eating before we saw temperatures like this, and I'm starting to panic a little bit. And the temperature is rising, and by 3 p.m. they have hot spots available that I'm temp gunning that are 104 degrees. Surface temp, and I'm temp gunning their bodies. Their bodies are at 82, 83 degrees. And
that's the difference.
I think I had reached out to like Lucas Lee, and I'm like, dude, should I be giving like nighttime supplemental heat or something? And he's like, no. And I had hit up Scott Eiper at the same time, and he calls me up and he's like, that's just what they do, man. Like that, and I'm like, he's like, that's what they're built for. And I'm like, why am I, I'm like, should I give nighttime like, why is she sitting out in the branches? And he's like, cause that's what she wants to do. That's what she wants.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to go in the cork hollow where it's 62 or 65 degrees. She wants to be up on the branch. That's her call. But it is terrifying when you like open the cage and like you're temp gunning them and they look at you in such slow motion and then flick their tongue and it's like,
it's like everything that's like the frame rate dropped on them or something.
It's like they're at like 1/4 speed. You're like, I think I killed my expensive snakes.
Yeah. But it's one of those things you're learning as you're doing it, keeping them outside. You're realizing it's just like we get really OCD and obsessive over fucking numbers. You know what I mean? We get so hung up on it. I've definitely done that a million times. I still do in some things, but I'm trying to be better and better about not getting super hung up on numbers, especially when it comes to temperature. Now, of course, if you're talking about like a clutch of eggs, that's a different thing, but just the animals experiencing fluctuation is like the most natural thing ever. That's like that's what they get in the wild. Like there's no snake that's just going to be at one, the way people get so obsessive where it's just like, it's got to be 84.2 degrees for 12 hours and then drop them down to 81 degrees for, the rest of the night. And if you deviate from that snake's dead. And it's like, no, that's not how they live. That's not even remotely close to how they live. You know what I mean? Now, obviously you have safe temperatures that you need to try to stay within for overall maintenance, and keeping indoors is different than outside. Like I said, it's, you need to be you do need to be a little more neurotic, on the numbers and everything indoors. But because you're kind of already keeping them unnaturally to begin with, And I think that the humidity plays a factor there too with how they handle temperature. But you're seeing with those snakes, when it's dropping down cool, they're up and at them. They're crawling through the branches, like you said. It's like they perk up, they come out, and even if they're not moving fast, they're cruising around. And really, some of this stuff, it's like if you think back probably to when you were a kid, I'm sure you've probably seen this kind of stuff before. Like I remember catching corn snakes, outside and like, it's 35 degrees, 40 degrees, and it's just crawling around.
Yeah.
It's like, that's when shit, half the time I found them is when it's cold.
Dude, I was just going to say the best time to herp in Florida is when it's cold and they're like, yo, I got to get warm. I need to get some sunlight. Like, you go herping in the middle of summer and good luck. Like everything is hiding. They're hiding from that super high temperature.
Yeah.
And most people have temp guns now. I think that if like you're a newer keeper, go outside and like temp gun around your yard.
That's exactly what I did that's what kind of helped inform me with regards to chilling out with the temperatures and kind of, looking at, obviously Florida's not the exact same as Suriname and Guyana and where the whole range they come from, but it's like just common sense. You go around, temp gun your yard, temp gun in the shade, temp gun in a spot that's getting hit with direct sunlight, and you're going to see a wide range of things. But one of the things that was eye opening for me was like the big panic I had with initially quarantining them outside was like, obviously the high temperature was what scared me. It was like the hot days. I was like, fuck, I'm going to going out there, checking them, multiple times a day to make sure they're not getting too hot. And I've eventually chilled out and just stopped worrying about that altogether, because I just, should have been obvious to begin with, but I just realized common sense. It's like, all right, as long as I'm not setting them up in such a way to where they're going to get unnaturally high heat. Like if I wasn't ventilating the enclosures, the tubs that they were in, enough to where then that's going to raise them, way higher than the actual ambient temperature is. They're not really sitting there at 97 or 98 for 12 hours straight. You know, it's up and down throughout the day, and they're going to peak at that higher temperature for a little period of time. That's usually not more than a couple of hours at a time. And then it's going to, go back down to a much more reasonable, low to mid 80s through, for a lot of the day. And then same thing at night, low 80s, high 70s. But you'll see that, you start observing them throughout those temperatures and seeing when they're active and when they're, how they're kind of responding to it. And you realize it's just like, yeah, I can chill out a little bit on this stuff, at least with the ones that are kept ambiently. Like I said, it is different with a more traditional indoor keeping where you're using external heaters, inside the enclosure, and you're battling with the AC all the time.
Yeah.
And
the AC is dehumidifying.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice that when you're conversing with other people around the country that keep snakes and reptiles, that they have a tendency to think that since we're in Florida, we just have high humidity all the time. Like, oh yeah, your house, must be, well, actually it's sweltering hot outside and the AC is constantly running, which is dehumidifying. And so it's actually it's the opposite. Like, I feel like when we start getting cooler temperatures, that's when my ambient humidity in the house is much higher because the AC isn't running as much.
Yeah. And that's for me, especially because I've brought it on myself by making a bunch of silly memes and jokes about spraying. So like people are on the attack with me, and trying to, one of the most common thing I get is just like, oh, well, yeah, it's easy for you to say because you're in Florida. But it's like, now it isn't they're kind of right, because especially in the newer room, it's more humid than the previous room was. I intentionally try to run the AC as little as possible, all year round. And that's kind of the trick with doing this, is trying to strike that balance between using the AC to keep things from getting too hot in the room, but also not running it constantly to where it, dries things out further. But before I was doing this, it's like I would get dry sheds because, the AC was running and constantly, especially during the summer. And it's like, the room humidity might be 35 or 40%. And then you got a heat panel inside that enclosure that's drying things out even further. So, it was a lot of the same kind of problems. And it wasn't until I switched my approach there that I started, alleviating those problems. But I know exactly what you mean. And that's it's an assumption that you don't have to do anything to even think about humidity, that you're just living in a swamp 24/7 indoors. And it's like, well, no.
Yeah. Maybe if we didn't have AC, but yeah, it's, and I don't blame him. I honestly, before I started tracking my humidity, I assumed that my humidity was always perfect, and then you realize, like, God dang, when you're in the dead of summer, it's like 30% humidity. It's quite low, a lot lower than you would expect, especially compared to you step right outside and it's 80%. So do you use radiant heat panels or heat bulbs, or are you doing, like, I see these enclosures behind you and they're sort of halfway, like in a window opening. Is that how you're heating? That's crazy, dude.
Yeah. So I switched to that a few years ago. So I don't use, well, let me see. Do I use any? No, I don't use any heat panels at all anymore. I was using heat panels on a couple cages for a few years still for the chondros. And then I was using ultratherm heat mats for, kind of functioning like a heat panel would on some cages. But those were on the outside of them. But, I've tried to switch to, a primarily ambient setup. And then the hot spots are just natural sunspots that form.
Dude, that's so cool.
So it basically, you get a, period, 2 to 3 hour period on on a typical day where the sun warms up, that section, significantly higher. And then, the females, what's been interesting about it, I've mentioned it before, but so that with this approach, with taking a more ambient approach to their keeping, I've noticed that they don't really bask very much. The only time they seem to bask, to actually go out of their way to bask, is primarily just when they're gravid. And even that is there seems to be kind of a pattern to that. Like they're more careful and less frequent with their basking at the early stage of gestation. And then also they ramp it down as well, towards the end, which makes sense because it's like, it seems a little similar to like what the chondros do with maternal incubation, where the first periods of it's like, slower kind of ramp up to that higher temperature period in the middle and then ramp back down again. The tree boas anyways, they seem to do something, akin to that, with their basking behavior. And they don't need to bask for very long either.
Wow.
If the temperature's up, they'll, that was another thing I learned from watching them is like, they bask anywhere from like, an hour to 3 hours, maybe 4 hours occasionally.
Yeah.
That's gravid females. The males essentially never really do, or at least so infrequent that it's, I can't even recall seeing one do it. And then, the rest of the year when they're not gravid, the females hardly ever do anyways. As far as any kind of deliberate, like, sometimes they'll shift over to the warmer side overall. But as far as like clearly deliberate basking behavior, I generally only see it once they're gravid.
So what temperature are they getting down to at night?
For most of the year, it's basically just the room temperature tends to stay pretty close to whatever's going on outside. So it fluctuates every day. But generally, the way I've tried to get the room to function is like it's kind of like I attribute it to like I'm an audio nerd, so it's like if you put a compressor on the room, basically, like it takes the running the AC a little bit here and there throughout the day will bring the temperature down overall. And because we're not literally outside, it's not as hot as it is outside. So it's like everything's kind of tamed down a few degrees off the top. Like whatever the peak is outside is going to be a few degrees lower than that. And then whatever the low is, it's going to be a few degrees higher than that. I do run an external space heater during the late fall and winter. Like I'm just starting to kick it on, just to keep the ambient during the day. On the colder days, I want the ambient to get up to at least like 79 or 80. And then at night, I don't want it really going below 68, just because it's a kind of a safe range to be in. But for the majority of the year, they're, it's high 70s or 80, 81 degrees at night.
Okay.
So it's not, not a real significant night drop most of the year.
Is your whole house that temperature?
No, just the room, just this room.
Okay. So is that like on a mini split?
No, this room. Well, so the new room just has a window unit.
Nice.
So yeah, so we have window units we don't have central AC here, which is actually really beneficial because at the old house we did have central AC, but the room that they were in was like a little small kind of extension Florida room thing, and it was like almost all windows. So it was like it was way warmer even with the AC running. So that worked to my benefit because I learned how to run that room to where I was like, kind of cut the vent down a little bit to where it wasn't getting the full blast from the AC. And then that and the sunlight coming through the windows with shades covering it to damp it down a little bit. Just kind of experimented with it to where I rather than fight against the sunlight, I worked with it and used that to kind of
so cool
control it. So it's worked out pretty well.
Is there anybody else doing that?
Not that I'm aware of. At least not the way that I'm doing it. I didn't really know, what I was doing at first, but it just seemed sensible the way that I took the approach. To me, I'm like, well, I took what I was doing in the quarantine room, which was just like this little small laundry room with just a single window. And in that room, it was more challenging to try to keep it from overheating. Yeah. It was just one single window, but man, the sun would fucking just blast through that window. So I couldn't have any tubs near, they couldn't get hit by that sunlight or it would have just cooked. And, but I started, trying to take that approach from what I was seeing, working there. And then I was like, well, how can I make that work indoors with the rooms that I've got? Just basically looking at what I had and how I could work with it. And to me, it's just like, well, sunlight's coming through these windows and warming this room up already, higher than the rest of the house. If I kind of manipulate the shades and manipulate the positioning of the cages, then I should be able to kind of create these natural basking spots that way. And started off just with I think I had 2 of them set up in the back that first year, just to see if it would work and if it would kind of just fail miserably or how it would pan out. And it worked really well. And so then I eventually, that was like, shit, I wish I could keep all of them this way. And I wish I could keep the juveniles that way as well, but I want to have that separation because I want to keep the babies separate from the wild caught adults. So they're in the front room and they're kept in a more traditional kind of setup. But I would love to do the same thing for them, and eventually will.
I'm not sure how long ago, maybe like a year ago, I switched from deep heat projectors over to 25 watt heat lamps. And like you said, it's funny how, like, I feel like so many keepers go through very similar things and that sort of neurotic behavior of constantly observing temperatures and obsessing over them to the point where you're like, oh my God, it's 84 and I was shooting for 83 and all this stuff. And it's like, and then once you actually see what happens outside and what wild animals are actually exposed to, just sticking a 25 watt bulb in there that turns on I set it on smart switches to just turn on with the sunset and turn off turn on with the sunrise and turn off with the sunset. It's so much easier. It's so much more straightforward. And guess what? My house gets hotter at sometimes of the year, and then it gets cooler at others, and the AC runs more and it runs less. And sometimes I go in there, like this is a boa right up here. I'll go in there and temp gun her. She might be at 95 one day and soaking it up, but she's in a 6-foot enclosure. She can go to the other end where it's 79, 80, but she's choosing, right now she's under it. It's probably like 92, 93 degrees in the afternoon here. And then tonight, and I think this is what is definitely gonna, I don't know if this is gonna hurt me in the long run, but at night my house goes down to like 72. Right. So like, that's probably not ideal, but I don't know.
I think that they do well with a night drop like that. And I don't know. And they're not, it's not like a monolith where they at least with the boas and the emerald, because, a lot of these are coming obviously from the same locations. My understanding, it gets pretty like colder than you would think, at night in a lot of their range. And I think that, them getting down into the low 70s is really no problem at all. And in fact, I think that fluctuation, I think it's more natural for them. I think it probably helps. It seems to me like that's one of the things I observed with keeping them, quarantining them outside and having the natural ambient fluctuation like that. It seemed like their digestion was faster and just strong. I don't know that they're, like, I've always felt like it's kind of weird. I guess I never really did this. And maybe there was a period where we briefly did, but like back in the day, it just seemed like kind of common sense. You have a heat lamp on the cage for the snake, you turn it on in the morning. Some point you remember to turn it off at night. I mean, it was on time. It wasn't on timers. It was like, you're a kid. So it's just like, sometimes they had near 24 hours of light if you forgot, but for the most part, it was like, they got roughly 12 hours of the heat lamp being on, and you turn it off. It just seemed like common sense to have it off at night, to where it's like, it's nighttime. There's no sun. So why would they have heat? I get there's little microclimates and like they're going to find little pockets of heat and stuff, but like, it's not going to be the same intensity. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to have 24 hours of the same intensity of heat. I think for the most part, and it all depends on how, none of these things are like exact. Everything's contextual. Like, it depends on how you're heating them and how your ambient what the ambient temperature in your room is and how that ambient temperature is being achieved, and all the things that factor in. But I think I do think that a nice night drop, especially during the cooler months, I always felt like it might be jarring for these animals in some cases to be experiencing both the things they're cued into from the outdoors. They're obviously cued into the weather changes and the seasonal changes. So they're feeling that stuff, but then they're also it's probably kind of weird to get when they're getting like an unnatural heat. I don't know. I don't know what that does to them psychologically, but it might be kind of confusing. Like, well, why is there this weird blasting heat in this spot? But it's like they can feel the temperature drop, the changes going on outdoors. So, and I feel that same thing with like the spraying. That's part of the mindset I have with that too. That like, for as much as people say it's super, like it's like, oh, it's really natural, and they, live in the rainforest and they get sprayed and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, but I don't think it compares. I don't think what we do compares to what they experience outdoors. Like most of the ways that we go about doing it, there's no build up to the storm. There's no pressure changes. There's none of that stuff. It's just, they're going about their business and then blasted in the face, and then it's over in 30 seconds to a minute. And then that's the, quote unquote, super high natural.
Could you imagine if that's how it worked? Like you were outside and it's like perfectly sunny, no clouds. And all of a sudden you just get like somebody turns on a garden hose right in your face with a fine stream and like mist. And you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah. It's just like, and you can't get away from it. And you're just like, and it's like, again, I think it's one of the things that people, you do gain this over time. At least hopefully that's something you gain over time as a keeper. It's like you start paying more and more attention to like the behavior of the animal and the response. But it's in the same way of the kind of obsessiveness and the OCD with the temperatures, and we get really fixated on that kind of stuff as people. I think that sometimes we get in our own way, we get something in our head we want to be true, and we'll ignore what the animal's behavior is telling us. That's something that I think we've are all guilty of to certain degrees. But I think sometimes that's something where it's like, how's the animal actually responding to this thing? And that's my thought on that with regards to spraying, with regards to lighting, can be that, same kind of thing. It's like, depending on how you do your lighting, if you're using, artificial lighting, I think people need to take more consideration into like, well, observe your snake. How's it responding to that? I remember I've seen plenty of times, like with the emeralds, I saw, a bank of cages, for example, of like juveniles, like a bank of cages where, they had bright LEDs on one side of the enclosure, pretty bright LEDs. And it was like, showing a wall of those enclosures, and it's like, okay, but look at what the snakes in those enclosures are doing. Every single one of them is getting as far away from that bright LED as it can. Is that really natural? Are they actually enriched by that? I don't think so. Now if you're doing that, if you're providing that kind of lighting and you're giving them shading and things where they can get away from it, and it's not as intense and everything, then I think that's probably is beneficial. But just there being a light and assuming that that's like more enriching and more natural is really not, I think, the whole story. And the same thing with the spraying, like there's ways to go about it that I think probably do feel a lot closer to what they would experience in the wild, versus just the like the example you gave where it's, nice sunny day and then instant thunderstorm in 0.2 seconds and it's over in 0.2 seconds.
It's a downpour on top of you.
Yeah. I had fun with that. I don't know if you saw that episode that I did with MJ a month or 2 months ago or something on the spraying stuff. We got into a really absurd meme war with that.
Oh, dude, I saw all of your posts. You are like the king of shit posting.
Some of it goes too far, but it's just fun. And like, it was just running with that idea. I think I went maybe too far with the fake Rain Man thing. but I thought it was the concept to me was too good to not see to fruition. So
I mean, yeah, some of your memes, I'm like, how did he even did he know this movie? Did he
I hadn't, I don't know. That just popped in my head. Like cause I would always make the joke, just refer to it as fake rain, just to be a shit ass, and it just popped in my head one day. I'm like, fake Rain Man, that movie Rain Man. And then just the idea of like a guy who that's his superpower is that he can count stuck shed scales on a dry snake was so stupid. I was like, all right, I gotta do this. I gotta definitely do this.
I really like the armoring up to go deal with where did that come from?
Just because I've seen, I'm just basically poking fun at some of the approaches people take, particularly with juvenile chondros and emeralds.
Yeah.
Now the emeralds, it's a little more understandable because they do have, they can bite the shit out of you. I mean, they can really hurt when and do some damage if they get you with a solid enough bite. But the chondros, I just kind of feel like, I don't know, man, I see people dealing with chondros as if they're like a stick of dynamite, and it's like, it's a yearling chondro, man. What do you think's going to happen here? What do you like? Come on. I'm not going to sit here and pass that much judgment. I get it. Like everybody's, and I get that like my experience is different. So like I'm desensitized to the biting and all that stuff more than somebody who's not dealt with all that. But still, it's just like, for me, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the guy with the shovel cutting the snake's head off in the yard. It's just like, come on, dude, you're a grown man. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? You really need to approach this thing as if it's like this massive beast. So, and it's just taking a goofy idea and taking it too far intentionally.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I actually think it's somewhat educational to get an actual food bite from a snake. I think that there's actual benefit to it because I remember, I can't remember if I had a Savu. It was either a Savu or a Maclots for like 4 days at one point. And this is like going back. This is when I used to keep. And I was friends with a breeder, and she was like, I have this Liasis. We'll just say Liasis. And she said he's always keyed up. He always wants to feed, and I remember I went in there and he bit and wrapped, and I think I had a leather glove on, and he just wrapped the snot out of me. And it was really an incredible, the force was wild, from this adult animal. And I just recently got bit and wrapped by my Maclots python. And it's really interesting to feel the bite, and then the amount of pressure, just like how perfectly their bodies are designed to do this, right? To get that leverage and to really anchor in with their teeth, and keeping, having, okay, this is a little baby Maclots, that I got from Dennis McNamara. I'm just going to keep cool and just, I thought we were having a good moment. I was like, hey buddy, yeah, you're being pretty chill. And all of a sudden he was like, bam, right on.
That's classic Maclots, right?
Yeah.
My friend had one back in the day that we always called it Mad Max, because it was like, they're little hellions sometimes like that. Yeah. And kind of unpredictable with the biting.
It was very unpredictable, because I was like, oh, look at you. You're not being defensive. You're being pretty curious, kind of tongue flicking. And then all of a sudden just bam, got me. And but obviously I didn't pull away, so I actually avoided bruising and, like actually having any, but it's like, wow, I can feel like he bit. And then once he wrapped, you're getting that pressure, and it's pulling in opposite directions, and it's really, it's probably beneficial for people to, it's probably like getting punched in the face, like there's some benefits to it.
Yeah, there is. I think you learn an appreciation and new level of respect for the animals. I mean, you obviously don't want to, like, it's not a recommendation to like, oh, let your adult emerald bite and wrap you, because that's going to really, really suck. But like, a baby one, a baby snake, a smaller one, just to learn how, I think learning how to take a bite isn't important. thing that keepers should do if you're keeping, because you're going to get bit, every now and again, you're going to get bit. And I think it's important, not just for you, but for the snake's benefit too. So you don't react in a crazy way and cause more stress and or damage and injure the animal. Yeah. If you take a bite and you just fling, you can literally just toss the snake across the room, or you can rip teeth out and cause a lot of problems. So if you learn how to take a bite properly, and then I think it also that leads to just learning how to interact with them in a way that, minimizes the stress when you're interacting with them in general, and kind of trains that snake to realize that, like, okay, this interaction doesn't have to be very stressful, if stressful at all. In some cases, they really seem to be not stressed at all by handling, and they just seem to be curious and exploring. But every animal's different there. And also that learning how to, deal with the individual animals that you're working with. And so all that stuff I think is important. So that a lot of I kind of, when I make jokes and post memes and do that kind of shit, I try to not just do something just for the sake of being an ass. I try to have some kind of, there's always a little bit of an agenda there, and that I'm trying to kind of get people. It's like a little bit of a mirror. It's like, all right, do you fall into this a little bit here? Like, do you need to reevaluate how you're handling your animals? Do you need to reevaluate how you're keeping them? And, so yeah, I think that's, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think that's where all that stuff kind of stems from.
So talk to me about your enclosures. Like, how are you setting up? I kind of want to go through like each life stage and how you're setting up. How do you set up a baby? And then how do you end up setting up your adults?
So the babies everything's based really, really heavily off of the way Ed sets his stuff up at Merino. So they're in tubs, either 6-quart, which I don't really love, but space wise, I had to do that because I produce way too many of them. So,
do you want me to drive up and I'll take some for you? I can help you out.
So the 6 quarts, which I don't really love, but it can work. And then or I like to use the larger, like 15 quart and up. And I don't use the Cambros for the juveniles, because I keep them in these Sterilite cabinets that I put, heat cable in the back from. And I did that originally to be able to have them in the living room, and to be able to easily give them like a night time where I just, it's because I'm up at night. And so it's like, lights are all on. I wanted to be able to shut that for them. And so I started, instead of a traditional rack, I used these, plastic resin, Sterilite cabinets. Functions like a rack though, basically, where, it's got back heat and they're in tubs in there. And for a while I was using, I had attached, like an Arcadia shade dweller to the inside part of the door that I would turn on to give them more of a light cycle. Because I don't have them, I couldn't set them up the same way as the ones in the back, which just have no external lighting. It's just all natural sunlight. And I was doing that for the first few years. I'm not doing that at the new place because they get a lot more sunlight that comes through in the front room, and it doesn't feel as necessary. Okay. Although I may reintroduce that, I'm not sure. And then I keep them over water. So just really shallow bit of water for the substrate. I don't spray them at all, even from, at any point of their life. I start off that way. I don't spray them from the beginning. And then I use the plastic garden fence, like, Ed does. Okay. Basically super thin. Cause they really like that super thin stuff. You know what I mean? They seem to want to anchor their tail in particular onto something that's extremely skinny. And so it's more like a little network of vines or something. And so I use that until they're, year and a half old, and then I'll move them up to a thicker perch. Or when they're getting to where they're heavy and they're like sinking, they're like pulling the plastic perch down farther towards, like, okay, they're getting too thick for this. But I feel like I prefer to keep them on pretty thin perching overall, even as adults. So let's see. So yeah, and then they'll have like a little, usually I'll have like a fake pothos plant or something in there with them. The only reason I haven't used live pothos or anything with them at this point is just because I've I've been trying to do things kind of like in stages and not throw too many things off and change too many things at once as I experiment with stuff. So like, if I'm going to try something, I'm going to try it for a while and see how it works, so I can have a better idea of like, what results I got with this change, rather than just changing it, a bunch of stuff at once and then not really know what the impact of each one of those variables has been. So, and just, I've never kept a lot of plants or had a lot of experience with it. I feel like I would probably end up just creating problems and killing a lot of plants. So I just haven't taken that approach yet. So all the plants I use at this point are fake, which I don't love the look of, but it works. And, I just changed the water for the juveniles. The water gets changed at least once daily. Sometimes I end up changing individual tubs twice if if I change the waters, at the beginning of the day, and then they take a shit at night, and I change it again when I check them at night. But generally it's getting changed every day. The yearlings and like 2 or 3 yearlings, I tend to go like every other day, something like that for the water change, just to lighten my load a little bit as far as the workload. And I haven't seen any real major negative, side effect from doing it every other day instead of daily. But I try to not go more than 3 days without changing waters for all the juveniles. And I try to do that for the adults as much, but you end up getting lazier on some of that stuff. And so they'll sometimes go 4 or 5 days without a water change. Very occasionally I might go up to like 6 or 7 days, but never more than a week at the most with that. And the more often you can change the water, the better, I find. They just seem to respond better to it.
So I have a couple questions there. What kind of water are you using? Are you using?
I'm using RO water at the moment. So,
okay.
I'm using RO water. I've used bottled water at points. But what I started doing 2 or 3 years ago now, basically as collection was growing and then as, bottles of water were piling up every week in recycling, and it was just like, this is wasteful and just inefficient to do this way. I started going to the store and using the water machine, at the local grocery stores, getting RO water, filling up 5-gallon jugs, and then using it, doing it that way. I'll use spring water. Like I might mix some spring water in there sometimes, but for the most part, I've just done, RO water, either, like I said, either bottled or from one of the machines. And I was still doing tap water for the adults for a while, but I switched them all over to RO water again a few years ago, just because I felt like, all right, this, I can, if I'm doing this for the juveniles, I should be doing it for the adults as well. The approach really shouldn't be any different. And I did notice an improvement, as far as their urates. It looked a little just overall better, less of that kind of crystallized stuff that you'll see. They tend to be softer, and we didn't really have a particularly bad water situation going with the tap. But I think that, depending on where you live, it's probably in most cases better to use RO or something filtered.
Yeah, I had RO put in at my house, and it's a game changer. Just being able to, fill up. I have gallon jugs that I saved, and I just fill those up and I put them on the bottom of my Rubbermaid cart when I'm doing water changes. And oh man, it's fantastic. I love RO, and especially when I do, and I do mist. I know. It's not a good thing.
I'm going to go ahead and leave the show.
I know, it was good. It was good talking with you.
It was a nice talk we had. I've got to go. I think you understand. This is emotionally difficult for me to hear this. I can't really handle it. No, I'm just kidding.
My animals are all abused. I will say, like, I don't have any animals that like being misted. Usually, so I would say once a week I go through and I just hit the substrate, kind of go around, and I'm done and I'm out,
I love how people get with me. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just funny. I've created a situation where people truly talk to me in this kind of like eggshell way. And I want to make this clear. Like, I joke probably too much about this shit. I'm totally fine if you spray, but I get this now a lot where people are like, dude, I don't mean it. don't mean to do it. I don't know what else to do. And I'm like, all right, just chill out.
Yeah.
You can be honest with me.
You were right about him. No, it's so the cool thing about the RO is, of course, no water spots, so it's awesome. But anyway, I sidetracked myself. So when
you go through and spray the whole enclosure,
I spray the snake in the face. I want to know.
Yeah, blast them. Just put it right into the heat pit so you really get the maximum irritants. I mix ice into the spray bottles as well. I want it to be nice
cold
touch.
Nice
touch. Really give it to them,
all right, legit question. So when you're doing your water changes, on the tubs, you're using water as a substrate. Are you taking the tubs out and just swapping them with clean tubs? Like, how are you cleaning out? Because you have like 70 babies.
No, not right now. I think I've got around babies. Babies, I've only got 4, the one that were born so far this year. But between all the juveniles, I've got around 40, I think, something like this.
Okay.
I was doing for a while. At first, I was doing the tub swap, so I would just have duplicates always clean, ready to go, and swapping that out. I don't have enough tubs at the moment. I've been meaning to get around to it, but I just got sick of melting fucking holes in tubs, and so I just stopped. All right, I'll just go back to cleaning them. But it is more convenient to do that, to just have duplicates of everything and to be able to swap it out. But so it depends on what the situation is. So I don't disinfect every single time I dump the water, because I think that's kind of overkill to do that, since I'm going every single day. I think that disinfecting every single day like that's a little over the top.
Probably not great for the animal too.
Exactly. Right? That's what I mean. It's I think going too sterile is not a great thing. There's an interesting thing on this. I remember years ago, and I'll if I get too sidetracked, just bring me back to the earth here on the topic of changing. But I remember, I think this was in a Reptiles magazine. I read this many, many years ago, and it was about a conservation effort with, I believe, Cyclura. I think it was some new thing, and there was a rule they had where you could not, it was never wash the food dishes for these animals, and never wash their water bowls. And the idea was that they wanted the animals, because they were going to be releasing them, they wanted them to get exposed to all the natural, bacteria and everything in the environment, so that they'd have stronger immune systems. So I don't go that far, of course, but I wonder sometimes if we overdo it, with just sterilizing things too frequently or too intense. So I obviously sterilize anytime they defecate or urinate, and then I'll sterilize. Usually, what I'll do is for the babies, I'm changing every day, and so I'll go several days without putting any F10 in the bottom or something like that in a row. Or once a week, something like that.
I can't remember where I read it. It may have been in a book. I know that this is probably back when I used to keep, but green iguanas, God, I hope this is real. Baby green iguanas live underneath the adults, and they eat the adults' poop.
It's possible. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know enough to say for sure, but it's possible.
To seed their biome, and and it's kids that are in households that are too sterile, and there's too many cleaners used. I know that they have more immune issues. I know that kids that are in households with dogs have a more diverse gut biome and usually a stronger immune system. So I always think about that. If I get a brand new snake and it's in its tub and it's a baby, and I'm pulling it out and wiping it down with Lysol wipes and disinfecting and doing all this stuff, I'm am I going too far? Maybe I should do this every other time, just to let a little bit of bacteria be present,
That's my approach to it. Is basically it's a tough thing to kind of balance this because, you do have to worry about spreading pathogens and you do have to worry about infections and things like this. So you can't just, especially I think in an indoor situation, again, it's like, what you could do indoors versus outdoors is obviously two different things. Mm-hmm. Probably in an outdoor situation, I wouldn't doubt if the animals would be totally fine if you basically never clean the dishes.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but I imagine that it would probably be okay. But indoors, of course, it's different. So I try to strike a reasonable balance. I was being paranoid at first. The first couple of years, I was every single day, change the water, F10 every single tub. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, it's probably too much. It's just, it's too over the top to do that every single day. And especially if the snake didn't defecate or urinate or do anything, what's the need for doing this? I'm using clean water to begin with. It's a little over the top. So yeah, I don't have an exact cleaning schedule for each tub on that. Other than, anytime they defecate or urinate, I obviously clean it. After I fed them, I do because, the, rodent juice on the bottom of the tub's no good. I dump the water out before I feed them, when they eat, and inevitably there's funk, you got to clean that. So
sure.
That kind of stuff. But yeah. So that's pretty much the frequency I do as far as the cleaning, with the juveniles like that. And like I said, the as they get a little older, I'll tend to go to every other day, changing the water out, and, no real negative thing I've seen. I could probably do that with the babies. Honestly, it would probably be fine to do every 2 or 3 days. But I just like to try to stay on top of it and do every day. And they're urinating and they're especially when they're first born, they're passing stuff more frequently.
Have you ever had one of your wild caught adults? Have you ever seen like one of their stools and like seen stuff moving?
No, I've seen that with a chondro before, but it's been surprisingly clean with the majority of the emeralds. I had one that didn't make it through quarantine that had explosive diarrhea. It was like 2021, I think, or maybe 2022. And I was pissed off when I got the animal because it was my own fault for, buying one online that I should have known better because it had been on, advertised for several weeks. And I generally didn't like to do that. It's like, if this isn't as fresh as possible, I generally wouldn't buy them. But it was an anaconda phase male that I wanted, because I couldn't, it had terrible luck finding a male, and it arrived in, way worse condition than it looked like on the site. And I was pretty pissed. But generally, they've had pretty solid defecations, and I don't recall ever seeing anything visibly in there. Now, the first few defecations right out of the wild, usually the stool is like softer and doesn't look the same as after they've been in captivity for a while. And I imagine that's because they're not only probably passing some degree of parasite load that way, but also they've been eating different rodents than what we feed. So I think the stool is going to look different.
I wanted to fact check myself here, and the answer is yes. Baby iguanas do eat adult iguana feces, and this is to that's so crazy, isn't it? Hatchling green iguanas have been seen to ingest adult iguana feces, and this has been shown in green iguana clutch mates. Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm glad.
And that's the idea is that it's like they're establishing the gut biome, basically.
Yeah, I think that's the theory behind it. So yeah, that it's actually, there's an interesting, so Melissa Kaplan's Herp Care collection, this looks like it was published in 1997. So if anybody's interested in that, just type in, Melissa Kaplan and like iguanas eating poop. And you'll get what you need to know. But yeah, I'm glad that was factual. I think that a little bit of bacteria is probably a good thing. Now, how do you
striking a balance there is the key. And we're still learning so much, you know what I mean, as far as what's the best approach to dealing with all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. So that's how you keep your young ones. Now I'm really excited to talk about how you keep your adults, because like right behind you, to your on your left hand side there, are those adults in adult setups?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's the adult setups at the moment. And so I've kept adults and still have them kind of strewn about in a few different, setups, but those are the latest iteration, and I like those the best so far, but I want to move them into larger enclosures, and probably go taller at some point. I want to experiment with some taller enclosures, because most of what I've used has just been either 24 or 18 inches high. And there's really almost no functional behavioral difference between, that minuscule of difference in height, at that point. But I would be interested to try keeping them in some truly tall enclosures to see what they do. Because my understanding from what I've observed so far and talked to other people about, there doesn't seem to be much difference in how they behave, with a cage height really much, if it's really like lower than 4 feet. I think that they're mostly using horizontal space at that point, and they're going to generally stay towards the top. If you're anywhere within that range. But I would be curious to try keeping them in like 8 foot tall or, something like that at some point, and see and really set them up for some proper vertical climbing, which is the thing we really never do right in captivity for probably any of these arboreal snakes, because it's just very difficult to accomplish it, and keep more than 1 or 2 of them that way. You know what I mean? So, go ahead.
Sorry. What, like those cages right behind you, what are the dimensions on those? Like who actually makes those?
Those are 36 by 18 by 18. So they're on the smaller side. They're actually from Thrive. They're just terrariums, but they have a pull out, easy clean tray.
I see.
Which has been really huge for me, because, that I have, like right over here, you probably can't really see them very well, but I have some of these super old school, like, custom acrylic enclosures that were, I actually bought off a guy that bred emeralds like 25 years ago back in the day. And Ed Marino has a lot of those cages. I think Tony Nicolai was the guy who first started doing those. And I don't know if I know the whole story on this, if he worked with a couple people that built them. I think, he worked with somebody who was building them and distributing them at one point. So I don't know who actually built these, but it was probably the same people. They look like the same exact cages. And having that pull out, substrate, if I can speak today, tray is super nice for taking care of the arboreals, because I can just pull that tray out, change the water bowl, clean it if they've defecated, do whatever maintenance I've got to do, and usually without disturbing them at all. And in particular, that's helpful if you've dealing with breeding pairs, so you want to just minimize disrupting them. And but it definitely makes you like lazy. Like you get, like I know Patrick just got a bunch of custom cages. Patrick Holmes got a bunch of custom cages that have those trays built in now. And I told him, I'm like, you're never going to want to go back. Like once you have that, it's just so convenient and so quick, and like so minimizes stress on the animals, that you're never going to want to go back to doing that. So that's why I started using those enclosures, because they're not perfect, but they have that. They have a screen top, believe it or not, but I cover a lot of that with just acrylic pieces. And I need, a decent amount of ventilation in the enclosures as well anyways, because, I keep them so humid. And so then I just have, some fake plants in there. I have garden perches for the perches. And those are, I can't think of the damn, I don't know why I can't think of how I mount them to the side, but glue them to the side of the perch holders to the side of the enclosure or side of the walls. Okay. And then place the perches on there. And I just use 2 big oil pans for water bowls.
So what do you
So
use
most of the floor is water, really. It's like probably 80% of it.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, are you filling that tray with water like you do with the babies, or is it?
No, I have big, I usually use either cat pans, the plastic cat litter pans, or the big plastic oil pans, obviously with no oil in them. And I give them a little flavor.
No used oil this
give
time.
Give them a little flavor. No, but So I use that, just depending on, because like a couple of the old, the acrylic ones that I have, it's like there's no uniformity to them. Like each cage is like a little different than the other because they were all custom. So like they're not exactly the same size, and some of the trays are like deeper than others. So the oil pan might work in one, the cat pan works in another. But I try to cover the majority of the floor with water just to have that constant, evaporation. Yeah. So, the majority of the floor is a water bowl. So it's pretty similar to how the juveniles are. Really, it's just not straight water. And if you were to just fill the tray with water, I think these are probably, they probably are watertight, but it would be a nightmare to like carry that, pull that tray out with, it would be a total nightmare. So definitely not doing that.
Now, so that's really cool. It's kind of empowering. It's liberating, how you're just kind of doing stuff and figuring it out and being so successful, kind of breaking away from traditional keeping, with like, I put half my cage in front of a window and that's their heat. Like what? Nobody's doing that. Right. Like that's like, and it's like eco-friendly too.
Yeah. And it's the thing is that, I figure the benefits of it too is that they're getting a natural light cycle. So it's like, I don't need to use any kind of, although I mean, that's obviously filtered through the window and then filtered through the glass or the acrylic in their enclosure. So they're not getting the same, they're not getting like, it's not like I have a UV light on them, but, so that's one thing I would do. If I had a totally customized room, I'd probably do something more akin to like what the Barkers did back in the day, which I should say actually, subconsciously that kind of actually, is part of the inspiration for this, is that the Barkers, I don't know what they do now, if they have the same facility or whatever, but I know back in the day, there was a point where they had built enclosures. And I know some of the Indonesian farms do this as well, where it's like, half of the enclosures indoors and then the other half is outdoors. So I kind of tried to do a version of that, I guess, a little bit of a version of that, but fully indoors. And
can you tell me more about how the Barkers were doing it?
Well, I'm going purely off memory, so I definitely not perfectly quote worthy, but from what I recall, at one point, anyways, they had enclosures where they were, there was like an outdoor section. So basically, they had an enclosure that had an outdoor, I don't know what the dimensions were, maybe 4 foot by 6 foot tall or something like this. I don't remember exactly, where they could go outside and, get the natural sunlight and experience the natural weather. And then there was a wall, which I'm assuming just a single hole. I don't really remember the details. I don't know if they ever had pictures of it or not. I want to say it was from an old Reptiles magazine article, probably. And then they had the indoor section of the enclosure, which I don't remember how it was set up, and I'm assuming probably set up kind of like a standard cage. And then from what I remember, I think that they would just close off the outdoor section so that it wasn't available to them if the weather wasn't appropriate. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is fuzzy memory from a good 20, 25 years ago. So I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But I know that there's Indonesian farms and stuff that there's different places that have taken similar approaches to that, where it's basically a half indoor, half outdoor enclosure.
So most of your enclosures are the 36, 18, 18?
Yeah, well, it's a mix of 36 by 18 and 2 by 2 cubes. Okay. And so what I want to do eventually is rethink how I do the enclosures altogether. And depending on what I do height wise, it's a tricky thing because I still want to be able to use the windows the way that I'm doing them. But obviously if all the cages were a lot larger and a lot taller, then that limits how much of the window space I can use for them. So I've got to figure out a good way that I can still accomplish what I'm doing and increase the enclosure size and increase the height. And it's going to depend on how long we end up staying here. If we're going to just be here for, a year or two, or if we're going to try to stick out here for 3 or 4 years and then buy a place. And, we don't know exactly what we're doing here. We're having to kind of play it by ear at the moment. Ellen's mom's not doing as well as she was before, and we needed to be close to her. And so we're just a few minutes away now. And so
That's good.
We don't know how things are going to be going for the next few years.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's the current setup is, a mix of 36 by 18 by 18 and 2 by 2 cubes. And then, some tubs as well, like long, like 36 by 18 by 18 tubs. I've used a Cambro tub successfully before as well, which are like 26 by 18 by 15. So all a little bit on the smaller side, which isn't ideal. But again, the eventually moving to larger. I don't know if I'm going to do 4 by 2 or if I'm going to go taller than that. I kind of want to go taller.
Dude, I started doing, so I have a lot of 4 by 2 by 2s, and then I had I had 4 custom cages made for my jungle carpets. And they're 4 by 2 by 2.5 tall. And that 30-inch high is so cool, and they never touch the bottom. They're always perched up. Like it's so, like I cannot remember the last time I saw one of them down on the ground.
Yeah.
Like they're always up in their branches.
That's what I was kind of thinking about. Like, again, it's tricky because I think with the emeralds and the chondros, at least, I think one of the key things we don't really do in captivity that they would experience, which I think would probably be, I'm assuming would be pretty beneficial, is we really don't have them ever set up in a way where they can do true vertical climbing. Which seems to be part of their natural behavior in the wild, is they're going to be, climbing up into the canopy to rest during the day and then climbing back down at night when they're hunting. And so, but I think from everything I've seen and talked with people about, it seems like they don't really tend to exhibit that behavior until they're in 6 foot or 8 foot or even maybe even taller enclosures in captivity, because they just kind of can't. It's not, and if everything's set up with horizontal branches, they're not really going to be able to do that vertical climbing anyways. So yeah, trying to figure out how beneficial that is for the animals, I think would take some time to experiment with it and see, how a couple of them set up in tall cages would react. I've heard mixed thoughts on that, but I don't really know anybody who's truly doing tall cages at this point for them. Other than some of the Australian guys are doing that for the chondros, but I don't really know of like 6, 8, 10 foot tall stuff for emeralds to see what they're doing.
Dude, how crazy would that be if you set up like a couple just to see what they do? Like, would you ever do like a, what do they call it? A poldarium or something like that, where it's like all water at the bottom and then like have branches and stuff going around everywhere. That would be so cool looking.
It would be cool to experiment with something like that. It would be really impractical to do on a large scale as far as breeding them. And that's kind of the challenge, when it's like that's the thing with this project is like, I'm part of the project is to, produce regularly and help create sustainable, captive bloodlines of a species that's, with the northerns in particular, that's predominantly just been a lot of poor condition wild caught animals for, the majority of the time they've been in the hobby. It'd be nice to change that a bit. So that requires some compromises on what you can do in terms of caging and everything there. But it would definitely be cool to experiment with, trying a few setups like that and seeing how they respond to stuff. One of the things that would be kind of interesting, I've heard, I don't know how much, it's hard to always gauge what somebody else is experiencing and if what they're saying is like if I'm interpreting what they're saying is, if I'm interpreting it correctly or whatever. But like I've had a couple people that have mentioned that they seemed like their emeralds were like hunting, like trying to hunt in the water.
Really?
So one guy that it was keeping his in a I guess a little paludarium thing. And he's like, I don't know what to make of it, but I swear it was like, the emerald was hanging out underwater for like an hour or 2 hours, and it like looked like it was like hunting.
What?
I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem very believable on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's like, they're found near rivers and stuff a lot. And I think dismissing odd behavior or unusual behavior or just behaviors we don't see regularly, just outright dismissing them is not good, because you might miss something, interesting about what they do. And it's not the first time I've heard somebody mention them, potentially hunting fish.
Dude, that's crazy.
Whether they do or not, I don't know. I've never tried to feed them fish and probably won't. And I've never set them up in such a way to where they have like deep water. On that though, one thing that I can think of that's interesting, and I haven't really seen this with the emeralds that I could think of, but I've had multiple Biak. Probably it seems like it's only been Biaks that I've seen it with, but I haven't kept all the different localities and species of chondros yet. But I mean, I've had multiple adult Biaks that will completely submerge in their if they have a large enough water bowl. I mean, they'll completely submerge and just cruise around underwater like they're swimming.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
I was surprised to see it. I was like, well, the first time I saw it was a female Biak, and I thought, well, she's just an oddball. But I've seen a few of them do it now, and it has to be a pretty large size. Either like I said, the cat pans or the oil pans that I use, and some of them will just fully submerge, and they'll nose around and explore that water bowl as if they're swimming.
Do you think that's something that you might want to pursue as time goes on, is like sort of like obviously continuing with your project of creating this large, stable population of captive bred animals, but then also seeing like what you can do and what behaviors you can observe in like really large naturalistic environments?
Yeah, I would love to try some different things like that and see, what you get and what they respond to, and trying to understand, like, because snakes, I mean, they're very, I think sometimes we tend to box them in terms of what they'll do and what they'll respond to, but it also can go the other way around, to where sometimes people feel like it's like goes a little too far towards like, just because a snake did one behavior once doesn't necessarily mean that's like a normal regular behavior for them. So that what would be interesting is to try to set them up in ways to where it's like, okay, try to create a stable environment with something, like a very large basin of water or something, or a completely, a deep water bottom for them. And if you set everything up to where it's like, this is a stable environment, you're meeting all their needs, and you have some of these extra things in there, do they utilize it in a regular manner to where you could start kind of extrapolating, like, well, is that maybe something they are doing in the wild? Like if I set up, I don't doubt that, at least with some of these Biaks, that if I set them up in a large enclosure with a huge, space to swim, that they would at least occasionally swim. Just because I've seen them doing it in the large water bowls. So it's like if it was an even larger container of water, I'm sure they would do it, and it makes sense. I mean, why wouldn't they? Occasionally, the chondros go to the ground more than the emeralds do, and in the wild, that seems to be fairly common to see them, encounter them on the ground. So it doesn't seem unreasonable that they would go, cruise through a creek or something like that on occasion. Does that mean that they are, for me, the topic of naturalistic setups and behaviors and enrichment and everything I have a lot of mixed feelings on it, because I think sometimes it's done in a way where it's kind of like a passive aggressive gotcha thing. And I think people sometimes speak out of pocket and don't really have enough years of experience to really know what they're saying when they're criticizing other keepers or other styles of keeping. Mm-hmm. But I think the other way goes true as well. Like, the idea that, only keeping them extremely minimalistic is the only safe way to keep them, I think is false. But I also think that, if it's like, I don't know. Okay. So it's a little bit of a side thing, but like, you grew up in Florida, you've seen plenty of black racers, right?
Sure.
For me anyways, the overwhelming majority of black racers that I've encountered is during the day, and it's when they're like hauling ass from one bush to another or something. You know what I mean? Like they're typically on the move, and they're going from one, fairly secluded, some kind of cover to another area of cover. And not that they don't expose themselves at all, but generally that's what I've seen for the most part. And usually they're lower to the ground, either on the ground or they're, maybe a few feet above the ground. But I've two interesting observations I had with black racers. One was when I was a kid where there was a lake that was during a time of drought where it was really low, really, really tall grass, had grown up, and I saw an adult black racer cruising probably about, 5 foot or so above the ground and picking off locusts just one by one, just eating a locust. And I'm like, I never would have thought that'd be a regular behavior of them. And maybe it's not, but I watched it do that. And then another interesting thing I saw was one that had to have been at least 20 feet off the ground, if not higher than that, just curled up looking like a wild retic or something when you see him in the trees over the rivers, you know what I mean? In videos.
Yeah. Super
cool. But that's one and only time I've ever seen one like that. And so, it's like, does that mean that the only way to keep a black racer would be to give it a 20 foot, a 20 foot enclosure? Probably not very reasonable. And same thing with everything we keep. Like we try to find some kind of a realistic balance between, doing as much as we can, but also, optimizing for what's the most important.
Yeah.
The most critical for their survival, for their physical and mental health.
Yeah. I remember, we had a mulberry bush in our backyard, and it was probably like 6 feet tall. And we have a pond underneath it. And I was doing something around the pond, and here comes this black racer. I didn't even know it was in the mulberry bush. It kind of scared me because it was like out of my peripheral. I'm like, whoa. And this thing came down. I'm not exaggerating. Came onto my arm, went around my neck. I moved slowly. I ended up having my hands underneath it, kind of walked it through my hands and put it back in the bush.
Yeah. I don't doubt it. I've done similar kind of stuff with them. Like if you move slow enough with them and you really careful not to startle them, they're surprisingly curious and I guess not surprisingly curious if you really just observe them, but like they're surprisingly mellow as far as responding to you. And yeah, I've picked them up right out of bushes before. I even had one, I have video footage of it. It was asinine, and I was so close to making this happen, but Ellen filmed me through the window because I told her, I was like, film this because I think I can catch this thing. And I went out. It was like this racer was like on the edge of the bamboo in the backyard at the old place, and I went to try to see if I could just slowly approach it, and it got a little spooked and it moved away, but then it was like just kind of fully exposed, and I slowly crawled up to this thing and literally petted its chin, just like
wow.
Pet the chin like that. And then, but it's funny because the video is like a good demonstration of like the complete difference in how they react to your choices and movement. Because then I'm like, well, let me just go ahead and pick it up. But I did a stupid move. Like I moved too quick and I reached over a hand and went to grab it, and he hauled ass away instantly. I had just been petting this thing on the chin, but the minute I changed and did a stupid behavior, spooked him and he took off. And then I'm like running off trying to catch him and didn't. But yeah, we got a little off on a tangent there. But they're the way you approach the animals and the kind of I think the energy you put off when you're approaching the animals makes a huge difference in how they respond.
I have this line that because I go up and I'll like grab banded water snakes and stuff like that at work, and just various Neurodia, some greens too. And the guys are like, oh, how come it's not biting you? And I'm like, I set my intentions. I let it know that we're from the same Earth Mother Gaia. And I went up, and like, I'm joking, but at the same time, there is a level of seriousness to it too, where it's like, no, like if you go into those situations where you're not like, and we've all been in the situation where you've grabbed a black racer or something, and you were amped up and you literally grabbed it like a falcon coming out of the sky. And guess what? You're going to get your ass tore up.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing with I found it to be the case with just about every animal I've ever interacted with. And now it's obviously that's an oversimplification. It's not saying like, oh, go up to your, friendly local mamba and stroke his chin, because that's obviously going to go poorly for you. But it's like if you internally have that kind of calmness and lack of fear, and you're moving correctly, generally at the least, they just don't get spooked by you. And so I don't know if they're necessarily even fully understanding what's happening in some of these situations. Maybe it's just kind of confusing. It's like, what is this thing that's apparently not causing me any trouble, but like, what's going on here? They're at least at that point where they're like, they're just kind of stunned and confused, but not startled. And you can have some cool interactions with them. And, that include, wild ones, and captive animals. That's why a lot of times with the wild caught emeralds, I mean, I would just try to handle them straight away. And most of the time, if you do it right, I mean, I hesitate to say some of these things because it's easy to forget that I have a different level of experience than somebody who's new to this. And so I don't want to encourage people that don't have that experience or don't have that kind of, confidence in handling them to just go thinking, oh, it's a great idea to take a wild caught emerald and get tore up by it. But if you do have that experience and if you have learned how to interact with them like that, I find that a lot of them are pretty mellow overall. And there's really just only certain ones that are real cantankerous where it's like, again, like I have the one anaconda face female where it's like, no, she's not gonna, it doesn't matter how chill I approach her. I could probably handle her without getting bit, but there's a very good chance that I would end up getting bit very hard by her. She is like, she does, like when she strikes, you can feel the power of that.
Yeah.
It's almost like, yeah, of course it doesn't, but it's like just the kind of, you can tell the intent with her. It's like a strike that's going to blow your hair back. It's like she wants to hurt you. So
that's when you need that armor, and
that's when you can bust out, the massive,
the riot gear.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, it's funny because sometimes I'll see like an alligator and be like, if I could just get up to her, I think that we could have a nice interaction.
Yeah, I took that. I've never been quite ballsy enough. I mean, I've never really like worked with gators, but I remember I did have one interaction where I got overly confident and jumped in to try to grab like a not huge gator. Like it was like probably about a 5-footer.
Okay.
And it was funny because I didn't have the experience. There's plenty of experienced people that can work with them.
Sure.
Great, but I didn't have that.
Yeah.
But I got overly confident one time and tried to jump into shallow water to grab one. And it was, it was just hilarious because I don't know what I was thinking I was going to be able to actually catch it from the position I was in. It was just stupid. But as soon as I hit that water and it bowed its back up and like, I realized I'm just like, yeah, this is stupid. If I get bit, this is going to do damage. This is not going to be like, it's bigger. Once I jumped in and really got a close look, I was like, yeah, this is going to do more damage than I thought it would. And I quickly got out of there. And it had no interest in, coming after me or anything. But, yeah, it was, and the friend I was with was just like, dude, you're a fucking idiot. And I'm like, I can't really argue with you on that. It wasn't a bright
yes,
move.
sir.
That's why I've never kept venomous, because I know I'd probably be I'd end up, making stupid moves.
Yeah, well,
getting overly confident and getting bit.
Yeah, I'm sure that has to be a thing where, especially like copperheads are so chill. Let me rephrase that. The copperhead I encountered in the wild was very chill. And I've heard similar reports that they're very laid back. And it was surprising. I was like, oh, this thing's more laid back than like a rat snake. It almost had like a confidence and just like dude, I want to go do my own thing. Just, let me get out of here. Pretty cool animals.
Yeah. And it's, there's a lot of venomous snakes are some of the most beautiful in the world. So it's tempting, but it's, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think it would be a good idea for me. I know I would end up doing something stupid.
Yeah.
So I just don't put myself in that position.
So I took a note down before. You had mentioned fasting your animals. When does that start, and like how, like what does fasting your adult animals look like, and when do you start fasting them? At what age?
So I typically start fasting them a little bit just right from the first year. So like I'll feed the juveniles, I'll feed them a little bit less during the winter. I don't totally take them off food. Although it probably, depending on when they were born in the year, it probably wouldn't be that bad. But I slow down a little bit. I don't feed them. I feed them a little less frequently.
How much time between feedings?
So like a typical, I'm random even with the juveniles as far as feeding. And I tend to feed large meals instead of small.
Okay.
So like I usually will feed like a pretty huge meal to the juveniles about every 2 to 3 weeks. And then, but during the winter months, it might just be, every 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Just back off a little bit. And then, and they're a little cooler as well. So they just naturally from the room being a little cooler. Now, I don't put them through like a full cycle. I don't let them drop down as low as the adults, but, I generally just, give them a little taste of that. 'Cause I figure you might as well just get them used to the routine.
Yeah.
And
so,
then, the adults, I take off food completely, usually starting right around now. Because things have been a little erratic and we moved and everything seems to have been running later this year, I'm probably going to do 1 or 2 more meals and then basically start fasting them like the end of this month or the very beginning of December, whereas typically I would do the end of October, beginning of November.
Okay.
And then, I've been getting more used to doing the fasting thing, every year to where I've extended that fasting period a little bit more. So, the first year that I started doing it, I think was, I don't know if it was 2019 with the chondros, either 2019 or 2020. And, but I just did 6 to 8 weeks because it's still in that slow process of unlearning the old habits of back in the day of everything's got to eat once a week. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, it's going to die. That meant that mindset, that they've got to eat like crazy. And, so now at this point, I'll typically fast them for 3 to 5 months.
Wow.
And then, reintroduce food. But that depends. It depends on what's happening with them. So if I put a pair together, so like if I start fasting them and then I introduce them, a month after they've started fasting and they start breeding really, right away and things are moving quickly and it looks like the female's starting to develop and stuff, then I'll maybe start feeding her sooner, to get that, to try to build those follicles up. But, generally speaking, somewhere in the 3 to 5 month range. And then, the males I continue to feed pretty sparingly all year round. So that's on the advice of pretty much, all the best breeders that I've talked to about it or heard say things on podcasts where, the males seem to generally be more active and better breeders if they're not, on the heavy side.
So, and are you doing the same thing with your chondros?
Generally, yeah, same kind of approach. I mean, they're basically, it's essentially the same approach that I take with them as the emeralds. The main difference is that the chondros digest faster overall than the emeralds do. So depending on the time of year, I might feed them a little more frequently than the emeralds. Most of the time with the emeralds, especially adults, I mean, it's rare for me to feed them more often than every 3 weeks. Like it's not very common, except for the females when they're really wanting to hit with food. I might feed them, several meals in a row that are spaced like 2 weeks apart, something like that. And especially like, Biak seem to digest faster than a ruse, for example, at least in my experience, relatively limited experience. So it might just be what I happen to have here. But, and then the same, obviously the differences between the babies, baby chondros, I think pretty much unanimously are passing food through them a lot faster than the baby emeralds do. I mean, they're borderline a Biak anyways, like borderline a colubrid. I mean, they'll really it's almost annoying like a colubrid where it's like, didn't I just clean this,
Interesting. Yeah. So this season, I am definitely going to be fasting most of my adult snakes to start preparing, because most of what I have now is, from 2023. So this, I think it's time that they start going through that seasonal, fast.
Yeah.
And I figure I'll probably just do it across my collection. I mean, my female Timor python has put a lot of mass on, and I'm like, all right, I think you would probably benefit from a lean time now, so, but definitely my Argentine female, my big girl, last year, I think I cut it back to maybe every 4 to 6 weeks over the course of, the winter. And this year I think I just want to let her go from probably about now until maybe like February, March, and then get her back on food.
Yeah. I think just kind of following, roughly what's going on with the weather is probably the most sensible approach, because that's at least assumed that, they're going to probably be finding less food when it's a little cooler out and a little drier. Although, of course, it varies from species to species, and we're not doing exactly what they have in the wild. But I think, that's probably the best overall approach, is to try to do it kind of seasonally like that. I think one of the big differences for me, having kept back in the day, when we were learning everything, this includes Eugene at the time, everything was getting hit with so much food. And it was just, everything was power feeding and really pumping everything up heavy. And sometimes I've probably gone a little too far to the other side of that, where I definitely, like my first 2 years of emeralds, I feel like I was too conservative with feeding the babies, to where they're probably a little on the small side. Well, definitely, I think the first year, a couple of them are on the small side for where they should be, because I was just trying not to go too far with them. But I think that, that's one of the key differences that's between the old way of keeping and now, is just learning that, like, these snakes really should not be fed probably near as much as we tended to back in the day. It's hard on their systems. I think it shortens their lives, and they're just not designed to take that much food in, at least not constantly. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you're feeding really heavy, and kind of really taxing their digestive system for like a short period of time, that's probably fine. And that might even be more natural in some cases, where it's like, oh, there's an abundance of food, and so they're catching meals a lot more frequently than they normally would. And they're moving stuff through their digestive system left and right. But I think that they need breaks from that. They need these periods of like, either no food or minimal food, to give their bodies a chance to chill out and heal and regroup. And also, seems like that old saying of, like, the snakes grow when you don't feed them. It does kind of seem true sometimes, where it's just like, you space out the meals a little more, give them a big meal and space it out a little further. And it seems like sometimes you see a better growth rate that way.
Yeah. I remember, when I did the boa symposium, I remember Warren saying that, that if you want your boa to grow, don't feed it.
Yeah, it seems like and he obviously has a much better understanding of the underlying physiology going on with them. But like, it does kind of seem like when you give them a bigger meal less often, it seems like they make better use of the meal. If that makes sense. I don't know 100% sure if that's true, but it's kind of what it seems like. You'll feed them a big meal, and then you don't feed it for a while, and it defecates, and still give it time. And then before you know it, it's just like, this thing's got some size to it. It seems like it's grown a bit since the last feeding. And, I think that also, with chondros and emeralds, I mean, you definitely seen that with boas, like giving them bigger meals sometimes, at least occasionally. I know some people are really nervous about feeding huge meals, but I think at least once in a while is something these snakes are supposed to experience. And it seems like, if nothing else, it makes their head look proportionally correct. instead of that pinhead look where they, they have like you see these like certain boas where it's like a pinhead with a sausage body. It's like, that's not what that thing's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
I'm,
like I get really worried. I'm like, oh my God, my Argentine boa, she's going to end up being huge. And ideally, eventually at some point, I'd like to have her in like maybe an 8x2x2 or, just something where she could stretch out a bit more. She's in a 6x2x2, but she's like 6.5 feet, so and I'm kind of like, she's a really good size right now. She's like a perfect size. I know she still has growing to do. I think she's a 2021. So like, I know that there's that she's going to grow more, but at the same time, like, does she have to, can I like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting kind of question with keeping in captivity because, overall, I think the tendency we tend to give into that desire to not only want to feed often because it makes us feel good about it. Like, it's a good feeling. It's just like any other pet, I think. It's like why there's so many fat dogs and cats and stuff. It's because it's like, oh, I love you. I want to give make sure you're doing good. Here's another meal. Here's another meal. And then and so it feels good to feed them and see them doing well. And then also it's snakes. Everybody likes, well, if you're into snakes, anyways, you tend to like a big snake. A big example of that species is almost always cool, and so it's like. That's also, I think, part of the temptation is it's like, what have I heard the maximum quote unquote size for this species is? Well, let's get mine as close to that as possible. That was definitely the mentality back in the day. It was always just like, I want this thing as huge as possible, as quick as possible. And, now I feel different about it. Now I think slow growth is the way to go for the longevity of their health. And, I do think that, I think our understanding of the concept of like stunting with them is probably not correct. I don't know for sure if like an animal, if a snake, at least all snakes, if they truly can remain stunted permanently. Like I think that I've definitely seen it with some snakes where it's like, okay, I have an emerald female in particular that I'm thinking of that, I fed her a couple of massive meals, like really, really, really big meals for her size to where even I was like, okay, that might have been a little much. I'm talking, where it looks like one of these crazy videos of an anaconda that took down a horse or something. But a couple where I'm just like, all right, let's maybe push the limits a little bit too much on that. But when you feed them a couple of big meals, truly
what
huge
size
meals
rat
like
did you
that,
give this animal?
It was like it was like a female emerald that at the time was eating like a medium rat was like a plenty big meal. And I fed like a borderline jumbo rat.
Whoa.
To where it's just like, again, I'm just like, okay, that was probably a little over the top. But I know these animals are capable of handling it. Yeah. And I was curious to see how, she would respond to it because I was, breeding her and she's still been actively breeding. I think she's approaching, probably going to hopefully ovulate before the end of the year. But I was curious to see like, if the big meal, truly big meal thing makes a difference as far as, the reproductive behavior, if it's going to push her to ovulate or not. But I did it earlier in the year. And man, she put on way more size this year than I would have ever expected because she had to have been at least probably a 5, 6, 7-year-old snake. And now a large rat is like what I would feed standard. Wow.
So you think that big meal like pushed her into a new bracket?
Yeah, I know it did. I mean, a couple of not just one, but if it was probably 2 times I fed her, I think, like a very, very large rat. And so I honestly, I think you could probably, with some of these snakes, you could probably just, if you really wanted to push them, you could feed the hell out of them. But is that good for the animal long term? Probably not. I think occasionally it is. I think all this stuff is kind of a balance. Like I think in the wild, the most likely scenario that's going to happen with these animals, with probably just about any snake, but particularly some of these boas and pythons, is they get what they get.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a huge, huge meal that they can barely take down. Sometimes the meal's so big, they die trying to eat it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been plenty of documented examples of that. I don't think we should be pushing our snakes to that level, of course, but I think more often than not, they're probably taking down quite large meals and then going a month, 2, 3, 4 months even before the next one. And, it seems that most of the stories I've heard of very long living, snakes, they were fed more sparingly, larger meals less frequently. And, to me, that seems more in line to what they're evolved to handle.
Interesting. Yeah.
Again, that's just talking boas and pythons. I don't think it's the same thing for all species. I don't think that's necessarily the case for colubrids, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. One last thing I kind of want to touch on before we wrap up. I know we're coming up on 3 hours here. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
You got a wealth of knowledge, dude. It's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Biosecurity. Like how do you, like, I know that you handle quarantines very, strictly. How do you ensure that your healthy animals stay healthy and like how separated are your babies from the adults? Like, is it like, do you always service the babies first and then go to the adults last, and then it's like shower before you go and see the babies again?
Well, so it's a combination of trying to be strict with what you're physically doing. So wearing gloves, disinfecting, and then keeping them in separate rooms, and then order of operations. So pretty typical stuff. And then, I haven't brought any new ones in. I think the last wild-caught adult I bought was like a year and a half ago, something like this. Maybe, no, not quite a year. Yeah, probably about like 15 months, something like this. I'd have to double check. It was that angry anaconda face female. And her attitude didn't put me off from getting any more, although a little bit of it did. It's like, I'm not, my goal was never to just do that. Like I said, that thing of just loading up on as many, doing the gold rush thing. So I've tried to be careful and slow and deliberate with it. And I've got enough, I've got about a dozen adults to where it's like, all right, that's more than enough to work with, moving forward. So I wouldn't be looking to add any new ones unless it was something that was just out of this world spectacular. And which kind of sucks because I've passed on some nice ones where it's like, it's tempting, but it's like, okay, I mean, I got to go through the whole pain in the ass of quarantine and all that. And so lengthy quarantine is really, with anything you're working with, I think is probably the most important and best tool you have. And I was really happy to hear Steve Tillis talk about that on the episode you did with him was that a few months ago, or was that, I can't remember if it was last year.
It was
like early this year, right? Earlier this year.
Yeah. Yep.
And him talking about that just basically length of time and then multiple stage quarantine is really your friend, so that you can really give time to see what an animal's doing, and it, and then creating space and distance, between them, I think is the best approach to do it. Now, when I would do when I was bringing wildcaughts in, I was real strict during that first 6 to 9 month phase. What I consider it like stage 1 was the outdoor quarantine, and they had to go through that. And then once I felt they had done well enough to come into stage 2, then they're in opposite side of the house in a different room there. And then they're monitored for another 6 to 9 months, whatever, 12 months, depending on what was going on. And you run some of the tests, but a lot of it is really just observation and monitoring their behavior, monitoring the defecations, monitoring their feeding, and looking for, symptoms of any kind of illness. And so then once I started producing the babies, that's basically the strict, keeping them, on opposite sides of the house in separate rooms, being strict with the gloves. So going through a stupid amount of boxes of gloves per month, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. A lot of hand sanitizer, a lot of hand washing in between that. not sharing any tools, and then trying to always do things in the best order of operations, which is always basically start with whatever the newest babies are and then work up through the day. So do all the babies and juveniles, finish all that stuff, and then do the adults either the end of the day or preferably on a different day altogether. And then, you shower in between that, so that you're again, just reducing the chance of spreading anything. I think that probably back in the day, and maybe still to this day, one of the common things that people do still, and I hear people still bringing it up a lot, and I'm always like, I don't want to shit on people when I hear them say it, but it's like the sharing tongs and taking a rat that they offered to one that didn't eat it and then giving it to another one. Like you hear a lot of that. And that was common back in the day. It's like you want like a garbage disposal in your collection, the snake, you can just feed all the, some kind of colubrid or something that you can feed the rejected rodents from others. But that's really such a bad idea. And it's a bad practice from back in the day that needs to change. So just doing all of those kind of common sense things. The gloves topic is something that I hear mixed opinion on that, but I think it's pretty critical because it's just an extra easy layer of protection that working with them that like, it doesn't, it's annoying. It definitely is. It gets irritating. There's times where I wish I didn't ever have to wear gloves again, but it's like you're working. In my case, I've got some of these wild caught adults still, and even though they've passed quarantine and everything is good with them, you still want to just try to be, on the safe side of things. Yeah. And so, I change gloves between each animal. Or if I'm working the babies, I'll change gloves, if I'm just doing water changes where it's just changing the waters, I'm not going to sit there and change gloves between every single tub. That's a little overkill. But I'm going to at least change gloves between individual litters of snakes. So like if I'm working this group, I'll put on a fresh pair of gloves, like sanitize, fresh pair of gloves, work those tubs, and change the clean waters. If I'm dealing with any actual feces or urates where you got to clean a tub, then obviously you're changing the gloves, between that. And a lot of times I'll change multiple times during the process of cleaning that. So like I'll put on a fresh set of gloves before, cleaning the actual tub, change those, toss out anything that needs to be tossed out, put on a fresh set to fill the water for the, to put in the clean tub and to put the snake back in. And then, so just basically trying to do all those typical kind of, easy, in my opinion, easy to do, tactics to keep your biosecurity on the up and up.
Yeah. One other thing, you mentioned feeders. Where do you get your rodents from? Do you breed your own? Like, do you like?
No, I couldn't and probably wouldn't. Honestly, I don't think I would do well with breeding them. I would end up wanting to keep a bunch of them, and I'm partially too much of a softie on the one hand, where I'd end up like, oh, I really like this one, I don't want to feed it off. And then I also just don't want to deal with it. It's just like there's so much work and everything. It's just, I think it would take the fun out of working with the snake. So I get from a combination of local and online. Local is always a pain in the ass because it's like, I'm sure you've probably experienced the same thing. It's like, it's so hard to find a long-term consistent local supplier. They're always coming and going, and the ones that I have that are like the most consistent, it's like they're consistent as far as like they've been still doing it for years, but they're out of what I need half the time. Yeah. So it's like, damn it. I can't get, particularly getting, a lot of, I find at least around here, a lot of people that are doing rats, they're always out of medium and larges.
Yeah. Yeah. When I've needed to do live for something new, it's like sometimes they have hoppers and sometimes they don't have hoppers, and and it's like, And then when they don't, and you're in the area and it's, 45 minutes away, but, I'm working and I'm only 5 minutes away. And then, oh yeah, we're out. We'll have them in next Thursday or something. It's like, God dang.
Yeah. It's a pain. And I in the future, I may change and decide to try to raise my own. It would have a lot of benefits. I mean, there'd be a huge number of benefits to it. I mean, the ability to control the diet, to control the cleanliness, to control your supply, or at least obviously have prioritize. If you're your main customer for that, then you can prioritize what you need. But, at this stage, I wouldn't have a good place to raise them right now. And I wouldn't want to deal with it. So, I just have to use a mix of sources, unfortunately.
Who's your go-to online supplier?
Usually I do either Cold-Blooded or Rodent Pro, which Rodent Pro is like, I don't love it. But they have the hamsters, which I use for some of the emeralds that are a little pickier.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, dude, so like if you end up like buying a house, are you going to be looking at it specifically for what you like infrastructure for, your projects and everything?
Yeah.
Or would you want to build a building on property or something?
It'll depend really. It would depend on what makes the most sense. And it kind of depends on what route I decide to go with enclosures. Cause like one of the things that I've taken kind of a different approach, I think, to how I've done this project and really just keeping in general is I've yet to buy like a massive wall of enclosures, of all uniform enclosures, which is really tempting to do. But the reason I haven't done that is because I feel like once you do that, you're kind of like boxing yourself into keeping a certain way.
Yep.
Whereas what I've been able to do now is experiment with a bunch of different DIY stuff and try, different enclosures to see what I like and what the animals work well in. And since I still have some experimenting to do on that, it's going to kind of depend on what route I want to go. There was a point where I was pretty set on eventually keeping everything outside. That was like the original kind of plan was like, all right, well, if we buy a place and can set everything up outside, and that would be the way that I'd want to go with it. But I've kind of rethought that for a number of reasons. And I don't think I want to probably go that route anymore. I think I want to stick with either something like what I'm doing now, or maybe something that's like a hybrid, like I was talking about with the way that I remember at least the Barkers doing that, where you have kind of a hybrid approach. And it'll depend on how I want to do the enclosures, what and how that would work. Because the one thing that makes me lean towards probably doing a dedicated building is that I could, control the configuration of windows.
Yeah.
And I would probably do like, floor to ceiling windows instead of just the standard stuff, so I can make better use of that. And then really plan like how you're going to be orienting cages around it and how that would all work. So that's what I lean towards now, is probably having a dedicated building. Yeah,
that sounds so cool. Dude, I want to get a building so bad.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a big game changer at this point to have a full dedicated, something where you have full control over it, especially if you can design it from the get-go. Yeah. Like I know like Ryan Young designed and pretty much built, and I can't remember if he built it completely himself, or he did like the overwhelming majority of the work himself, and designed
there was a lot of
the way he wanted it.
It's like an addition basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, listening to him on Cush's podcast talk about the construction and everything, it's fantastic because you can kind of learn through him what he wishes he would have done different, because that's always going to be a thing, right?
No matter what you do, you're gonna immediately wish you'd have done a few things different.
Exactly.
Once you've worked with it a little bit.
And what I've recently, I was actually texting with Ryan and sending him some pictures. There's this place nearby. Are you familiar with like down this way, like Arcadia? Are you familiar?
I'm not. I haven't really been there.
I don't really go there, but there's not much there.
Yeah.
But they make sheds, and you can make these sheds. I say sheds with like quotations. They are they can make a 16 wide by 38 long shed, put windows wherever you want. They can put in interior walls. Then they can insulate with spray foam the entire thing and put the siding that they put on the outside on the inside. They can put all your outlets as high as you want.
Yeah.
Dude, like
that's the way to go.
The whole thing, a 38 by 16 that I had spec'd out is like 35 grand delivered.
Damn.
And it has a floor and everything. They just bring it out to your property. They level it. And I'm like, you know, for me, I'm like, I don't want any, like, I want to have like a 10 by 16 room, like my washroom with a freezer and maybe like racks and incubator, stuff like that. Right. And then on the inside would be the adult room. And I'd probably have almost no windows because, you know, I use PVC cages and have the outlets 80 inches up on the wall. And dude, like, oh man, that's my goal right there is getting something like that.
That would be ideal. You know, something where you've got space to set everything up and, you know, as large of enclosures as you really want to go, you know, within reason anyways, of course. And then, you know, a little bit of room to grow as well, if you wanted to, and just having being able to do stuff where it's like, you know, you can do all those nice little things. Like you said, have the outlets raised, do anything that's going to make your workflow more enjoyable and just, you know, more efficient so that you're able to basically maximize how much time you can enjoy working with the animals and not have anything that's annoying that gets in the way and that kind of takes the fun out of it. I think that's something that's important. Like that's one thing. I mean, it's a relatively minor thing, but like I can't wait to get to a point to where I have no cages that are low to the ground at all. Because it just I've cleaned so many between working on a wholesaler back in the day and keeping stuff now. I've cleaned so many tubs, and it's just picking them, you know, getting the ones that are down low and dealing with them or dealing with it in the rack down low. It's just annoying to do. It's a minor little gripe. It's kind of whiny, but it would be cool to not have anything down low.
It'd be cool to not have low back pain.
Yeah, exactly. Like it would just be cool to where it's like you never have to bend over to clean anything at all. And, you know, obviously he's not going to really reach that, but like that would be a nice thing. And yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. At some point, you know, a nice dedicated building, I think is the way to go. But for me, it's like, I still feel like I've got a few more years at least of experimenting with enclosure type and size and style of keeping before I want to kind of embark on that kind of a like, okay, I'm going to do a massive overhaul and kind of uniform or unify all of the enclosures to where it's like, this is the standard for all of them. And I feel like I've got it down where, you know, I mean, who knows? I may reintroduce some kind of spraying or misting system. Probably not. Yeah. But maybe, you know, maybe
you can't now.
Yeah. Now, I'll can you imagine if I start spraying? I'll immediately have people that'll just dog on me all day long for that.
Yeah. Like 2 years from now, you're like, listen, guys, actually, like
I switch gears. I'm like, actually, I think they should be sprayed pretty much, you know, 5, 6, 7 times a day, and
no water bowls.
Yeah, zero water bowls. You know, that's one. It's funny you mentioned that. That's really, if like when it comes down to it, that's the thing that kind of started my making a bunch of jokes about the spraying thing. Was that from a guy that he was like, you know, everybody knows who he is. There's no point in mentioning his name, but he had basically run out and got a few wild caught emeralds and had them for like a year maybe. And he was making the claim and like, you know, trying to tell new keepers, and he was just making posts on the Facebook groups stating like it was like a matter of fact that like, oh, these snakes won't drink standing water. They won't drink from a water bowl. And so that, you know, you need to just be spraying them 24 hours, you know, basically spraying them for all their hydration. And they, you know, there's no point in giving them bowls because they won't drink from them. And it's like, all right, I'm going to push back against that, because not only is that blatantly false, but I think that whether you spray or not, if you're not providing some kind of, you know, water bowls for the animals to where they can drink whenever they choose, you know, you're doing a disservice to them.
Yeah.
So,
do you see yours like go down and drink?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. They'll drink and they'll, you know, they'll respond generally more if you put a fresh bowl of water in, and say you go around and put fresh bowl of water in for all the adults, and you come back as soon as the lights are out or something, or here it's not really lights out, but like when the sun goes down, you'll almost certainly see more of them drinking the fresh, the very new fresh bowl. But I mean, they'll drink after 2-3 days as well. They drink when they need to,
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's why I think it's important to really just give them access to, as much sources of water as possible, so that they can drink as much as they want when they need to drink.
Yeah.
And they'll do it,
So outside of chondros and emeralds, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have a few white lips, and I have some Jamaican boas.
Nice. Jamaicans are beautiful.
Yeah, they are. They stink, but when
they piss all over
when they
you?
musk? Yeah, I haven't put in the effort to really like get them kind of quote unquote socialized, for lack of a better term. So they're still, they'll musk sometimes when you interact with them. The male's a prick in particular. Is a young male. He's been getting bold with me, where he's like inclined to actually strike at me when I go in there. But I want to set them up different too. Like I got them from my friend. They all came from Crutchfield, and my friend had them for a couple of years, and then he moved out of the state, and obviously couldn't take them with him, and so I got those along with the white lips and a couple of chondros, and they were in a CB70 rack at the time, and I kept them that way for a while. But I kind of hate working with those racks. And I've moved them to some different tubs that are a little larger and clear all the way around, but I still don't really love that setup. So I think I'm going to end up probably setting them up somewhat similar to the emeralds, as far as the caging, not the exact same way, but like, I think I would just enjoy working with them more that way. And I'd probably be more inclined to take them out a bit more often. But they're incredibly beautiful species, and I want to do, my part to help sustain them as well. And, and then the white lips are cool. They're I don't find them to be that ornery, really. It's kind of surprising. They're a little bit.
Are they southern?
Northerns? Yeah, they're northerns. So they're a little bit, but like, considering I really don't handle them very much, they're not too bad. They're a little spazzy at first, and then they chill out a little bit, and they don't really seem to be inclined to musk or piss on me, which is nice.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a win.
And then, and I've got the chondros, and I'm tempted by Amazon tree boas, man. They're super cool. I'd like to get.
So cool.
Yeah, I'd like to get some of those at some point. Probably won't get too many of them because I just won't have space to get it real heavy into another species. But there's a few things I would still like to have for fun. Just have a pair here or there. I'd like to get some boas again. I had boas when I was younger. So very small group of boas would be nice.
I would really like it if you got some Argentine boas. That would make me very happy.
I would make me happy as well, and that may happen at some point. At least to have one pair of them would be really cool, because they're just such a cool species, and there's nothing quite like holding an adult female. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're just that build, the way they look, and I can't really recall too many of them that are like ornery. I mean, they bluff a lot when they're young.
Yeah.
But they rarely bite, and the bluffing is always just kind of funny.
Yeah, they chill out like so consistently that I've seen, where it's like, gosh, like you guys just like automatically chill out, and maybe a very high food drive for sure. Like they're ready for food coming in, but my big girl, I feed her in a Rubbermaid tote just because I don't like the jumbo rats getting wrung out into her substrate, Yeah. It just, the smell is nasty. And I was talking to Dr. Loafman about this. It's resulted in her having zero food response ever when I go inside of her cage at all. Mm-hmm. She's not conditioned. She's basically
conditioned to go in the separate thing. Yeah.
Yep. She never thinks that me coming in is food. So like it's made me interact with her very confidently, where I just go right up to her. She's very curious. I'm in love with that snake. I mean, anybody
awesome.
that listens, that to my show, she is an incredible animal. I absolutely love her. And dude, if you want the number of my lady that's got those beset animals, I can give you that number, and you can.
Yeah, I'm at some point I'm gonna have to add one or two of them, because they're the thing with me is, again, it's just that temptation. It's like the slippery slope. It's like if I get a pair of them, then I breed them, then I'm gonna want to keep holdbacks, and so it's just I'm trying to.
It'll be good.
Well, it might, but again, it's like that ever expanding thing. I mean, you figure like, I mean, I think, I'm only now really coming to terms with how silly my holdback game has been with the emeralds, to where it's like, all right, why does my brain not accept the reality of that there's no way that I can keep and raise all of these fucking snakes? It's just some stupid thing. But I mean, I say that partially jokingly, because obviously I know long term I'm not going to be keeping all of them. But I definitely do have a hard time letting go of them, and it's because you become attached to them, and B, and I'm fascinated by the variety of phenotypes with them, to where it's like I really do want to pursue a bunch of different directions. Yeah. But I'm, the reality is I can't pursue every single one of those directions. There's just not going to be enough space or time to do that. So,
well, look at what happened to Andy Carbon, where he produced his, and then he had that unfortunate incident with the overheating, and then he hasn't, I don't think he kept any holdbacks, or he didn't keep many, so it's
that was part of the reasoning too. It is definitely that fact that you don't know, they're live animals and things happen. Yeah. Accidents happen. I mean, shit, look what happened with Ben.
I know.
You know what I mean? That's the nightmare scenario. That what happens if you lose everything? That's terrible. That's awful. And
I
hope
is he like rebuilding his collection? I hope that.
Yeah, he's rebuilding. Good. He's taken a really, I haven't had a conversation with him in person yet, but I've messaged back and forth with him about it. And yeah, he's he's in the process of rebuilding, and he's taking a really amazing approach to the whole situation to be bouncing back that quick. I mean, that's devastating enough to where it would have been very understandable to just be like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
It's too painful, too devastating to see a path to recovery. But he's seems to be a very resilient dude and very committed and passionate person. So he's straight back at it.
Classic
rebuild,
New Yorker.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean that's he's one of those dudes where it's like, if the term lifer applies to somebody, I would think I think it's him. I think it's a guy like that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me.
I've learned a lot from you. Yeah, this was way overdue. I know we've talked a couple times, and yeah, I'm honored to have you on and be able to pick your brain, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise, man. I'm a fan of the show. I've been watching it and enjoying it. So definitely cool to get on here.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.